Hi, everybody. Welcome to ZealZaddy. And I just noticed my mic's a little off and it's annoying me. I'll fix that now before we get any further. This is StoryTalk, where we have a TTRPG talk show on a different subject every week. This episode is going to be on GM prep. So it's preparation notes. How far do you go with your preparation? Do you prepare for improv? What have you? So how much prep is too much? Is that an oxymoron? Potentially. Some game masters are classic over-preparers. I am one of those. Some do very little, and they still run great games. So I'd argue but I would argue that few games where the GM wings everything results in a great story in a longer campaign. I think for one-shots or mini campaigns, you can totally do it, and it'd be great. It'd be fine. But I think it's very hard to get lost in the details over a long campaign. But that's what planning and note-taking does. It allows a GM to be ready for anything during the session, build up to bigger things in the story, and I would even argue that it makes him better at improv. And we'll probably talk about that a little bit later. All that prep doesn't show up in every session, though, and it's really not meant to. A lot of prep really gets GMs ready for when they need details later. We'll get into that. But all that prep does seep into the minds of a GM or a DM. So it gives you material to unleash your most creative aspects sometimes, your most dangerous things. So let's talk GM prep and notes. Please, if you have questions, you can put in all caps questions, and I'll see it in chat more easily. Oh, by the way, I'm Scott, and my pronouns are he, him. During intermission, we will show and highlight running or upcoming Kickstarters and crowdfunding campaigns. So if you see something you like, click on one of the links. Although don't leave the show, just click on it in a new window. Let's meet our guests tonight because we have really awesome guests. All right, we're going to go, I guess, in clockwise order. So we're going to start with Trooper and go around. So it'll be Trooper, Tiffany, Benjamin, and Sean. Say who you are, where they can find you.
Hey, I am TrooperSJP, and you can find me on Twitch at TrooperSJP. And I GM games, and I play in lots of games. I've been running RPGs on Twitch for 6 years now, about 6 years now, and I do a lot of different sorts of things. I've also run on other channels, so you've probably seen me either GM or play on lots of different places. I am somewhat known to do lots of historical RPGs, yeah, but I do other stuff. Currently, I'm GMing Traveler at the moment, and that's me.
That was a very abrupt stop. I was mid-drink.
Oh, Tiffany. I just wanted to keep it short.
Yeah, great. Tiffany.
Hi, I'm Tiffany. I play with Scott in his Mist of Elixir game. I play Caradwin, and I run my own campaign called Dungeon Damsels that we started in 2018, and we've had a lot has happened. And now it's on hiatus right now because my computer decided to not work, and I'm on my laptop right now, which doesn't edit videos very well. So that's just happening. I'm excited to be here and talk about GM stuff because this is my mental bread and butter. I'm ready.
Awesome. Ben.
Hey everybody, I'm TTBenjamin. I am a actual play producer, performer, and game designer. My most recent release, Adversary, is still coming soon to drive through, but we did fund in December, so very excited about that. I am formerly the GM of the Lawful Great Adventures podcast, but we have ended that podcast. Well, there's still 2 episodes to get edited and released, but we'll get there. And my latest project is now Game Woven, which is an indie showcase actual play where we build a world one game at a time. It's an exciting experimental, very unique project. I hope everyone checks it out. It's called Game Woven. It's a lot of fun. I kind of come from like D&D Pathfinder roots, but lately I've turned into sort of like an indie showcase darling, so I run a lot of stuff these days. Most recently, I did a live stream during the Kickstarter of Soul Muppet Studios' Inevitable, which part of what I'll be showcasing is the prep that I did for that. I am also, I think, probably the dissenting opinion in the panel because I am traditionally a low prep GM. The entirety of the 2.5-year run of Lawful Great Adventure was done low or no prep to avoid personal DM burnout. It's challenging. Awesome. There are ways to structure it, and I'd be happy to talk about the kinds of things that I do prep in order to be maximally efficient. In addition, the kind of prep that I do for one-shots versus long campaign play. Scott, I'm actually the opposite of you. I do way more prep for a one-shot than I do for a long-form game.
Wow.
Like, way more prep.
I'm excited to hear that now.
Yeah. No, it's all good. It's all good. It's part of the discussion, right? Like, that's just kind of part of the thing. But yeah.
100%. I love different views on all this stuff. I'm happy to hear all of them. All right, Sean.
Hey there, everybody. My name's Sean O'Donovan. I am the creative director at Paradise Productions. And I've been streaming TTRPG stuff for 3.5 years-ish now. On and off between different places, not just on Paradise. Probably the thing we do that's the biggest thing we do is once a year we do a big charity weekend where we get as many people in as possible to play and raise money for different charities. We typically have been doing Jasper's Game Day. This year I believe we're going to be doing Take This, but we're still figuring everything out. And we like to showcase other types of TTRPGs during that weekend that are not just D&D. Every year we get a few more games that are not D&D, which is always a lot of fun to see. I come from D&D, but my heart truly actually lies in Quest RPG, as probably one of my favorites to run. And just generally this year I've been pushing outward further and further to try different things. I have so many books laying around this place that I need to get through.
Two of you are big Quest people now. Benjamin is also a big Quest person.
Oh, I know it.
Oh yeah.
But outside of D&D stuff, I'm a professor of filmmaking. I do a little bit of filmmaking myself, and yeah, so narrative and creativity have always been my bread and butter. So I'm excited to talk about preparing for GMing stuff. All
right. Well, while we're waiting for new questions to roll in, or any questions to roll in, I have a bunch of them to start. So I'm going to start with the most typical question there could be. How much time during the week do you spend planning each session? And I have a feeling there's going to be some wildly different numbers here.
I spend a lot of time just having it sit in my head. I don't spend a lot. No, that's not true there. I spend a lot of time doing it, but that's just because I'm insane and have the time to do that. But I spend a lot of time just thinking about what's happened, and I DM every other week because I just can't like think up new stuff that fast. I don't know how other people do it, but and then I don't like using tables because they're too like random and like things need to be connected. But typically what I'll do is I will let my brain take a break for the rest of the week I did DM, and then upcoming that like Monday, I'll think on it, and then Wednesday and Thursday, I'll spend like a lot of time just actually putting it down on paper or in the computer. And like sometimes I'll spend like 4 or 6 hours on it. Like I spent a lot of time on it. That's just me. I know other people aren't that way. I'm not saying you need to be that way, but that's just me because I just have to figure out everything.
All right.
And that's what I do.
Cool.
Anyone can go.
Anyone want to hop in? I mean, you know how you prep.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. Before I streamed TTRPGs, like it was like that kind of thing where you're like, I'm either playing twice a month or once every 3 months, and timing was always that way, so prepping was always a little bit more low stakes. But I suppose for the last 3.5 years, I have had to prepare a D&D session each week. So it depends on the week, and it depends on the story that we're exploring. I fluctuate pretty frequently between low prep and high prep. I like to do a lot of foundational prep that can carry through many sessions, so that I don't have to week just sort of bury myself in preparing several different things. So I'd say at the very minimum, I'm spending at least probably an hour on just getting ready to know, kind of give a little bit of a brief recap to the group, and just sort of know where things are going. Now that's if I've already got, like, wherever the characters are, whatever the storyline is pretty already well established, and I'm just kind of preparing for what we're doing next, and we know what we're doing next. Now if the party or whatever game it is a little bit more like, we have no idea what's going to happen next, and they can choose what's going to happen next, that's where it's a little bit more figuring out, how much do I need for each of these things? Do I need to go any further than that, or do I just need to establish, like, oh, here are the 5 plot hooks that could be coming out in that space, and how, can they be versatilely changed to a different location if necessary? Can they be, can those plot hooks be done anywhere, or do they have to be at this place? And kind of try to figure out what the party's going to do next, and that's going to help determine how much time I'm putting into prep.
Nice. Yeah, I find myself doing that too. I do a lot of pre-prep. You're about to jump in there, Trooper, I see.
Yeah, it really depends. A lot depends on the kind of game that it is. I run very radically different styles depending on just what the players want. You know what I mean? But my home style, like the style that I enjoy GMing in the most, which I do not GM the most because most players are not, say they like it, but they don't. I love a good sandbox. I love GMing a good sandbox, but that requires players who are very proactive, and many players don't have the skills to do that because they've not been taught how to do it, because they've been punished whenever they've tried. And so you have to, like, there's a thing. But if I'm running sandbox, I almost do no prep at all. I do immense amounts of prep before the campaign starts. But once the campaign starts, and I'm not only in that style, not only am I a sandboxer, but I'm a simulationist, wherein I set up the universe, and then we just find out what happens. And once everything is set up, and I know everybody's motivations, and I know what all the stakes are, I don't really have to do prep anymore, right? Once the campaign starts, I can do zero prep. Like, maybe spend 5 or 10 minutes thinking about it. Prep will only happen if something shows up. Like, do I need to make a new prop? Is there a kind of a special thing that I need to do? And I often will use systems when I'm doing that kind of a game, a system that I'm very conversant in, so that I can improv stats. Like, I don't tend to do games where you can't, where I'm like, oh, okay, if it's GURPS, I know exactly what an average person is like. It's this, 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 and this. And so I don't even necessarily have to make a character sheet beforehand. If it becomes somebody who's important, then I will do it sort of in retrospect. So usually it's not prep, it's post, right? Like, once the episode is done, I have to type up all the notes of what I did and said so that I know that for later. And if there are things that I have to do. So it's usually like I usually do post rather than prep. And prep will happen if I need to make some props for the characters, or I need to get new art or new costume pieces or any kind of like special something for them. Maybe I need to make a map. But I would say, generally speaking, no prep once everything is done, unless there's something special that happens. But for other games, a game that's a bit more traditional, then that's a lot of prep, right? Because then I have to actually prep things in that more traditional way for the players who want that story, and that's usually just a lot more prep. I will do special moments. Again, like, special moments would be, oh, we haven't done spaceship combat in a while. I'm going to go and run a practice spaceship combat on my own before I actually get to games, just so I can make sure I have all the rules under my fingers. And so I'll do things like that. But generally speaking, once the game is up and going, I often do almost no prep at all. It's just almost all post.
Nice.
That's interesting. I've never heard it called post like that.
Yeah.
Now I'm realizing the more you're saying that, I'm like, oh, a lot more of what I'm doing, I'm realizing now is post. It is.
I've never heard it that way either.
It out.
Yeah.
And I do have a question about your notes, but I had that written already about people's notes during game, but I'll save that for later in the show. Ben,
I really like what you said, Trooper, about being conversant in a system, because that's kind of the big thing that I really lean on. The amount of time I spend prepping is about 15 minutes on game day. If pretty much on average, about 15 minutes. And it'll be like, oh yeah, people are showing up. I better write some stuff down. Usually it has to do with double checking a couple of encounters, making sure I've got, I'm like, okay, I know there's going to be an encounter. I might not know exactly where, but I know there's going to be one. This is what I want to throw in front of them. I need to make sure I understand those stat blocks. And then I'll just throw the links to that encounter, because I'm running my home game, and Lawful Great Adventures was Pathfinder First Edition. So I just rip stuff off of the SRD and just paste the links in my doc, and then I just pull it up when I'm ready to pull it up. I'll do a thing. I'll do an NPC control sheet. Like it's a combat sheet that I'll have where I'm like, okay, this is what a guard is like, and I'll have all their stats. And just like in a line, like in a Excel spreadsheet, with like a spot for hit points, and I'll have that for anything that's kind of normal and average. So if there's like a surprise combat, I'm just like, here's my sheet, 5 of them. And I was thinking about actually creating cards that I could write on. So that the point is that unless it's a big bad or somebody really special, in most games that are not D&D, like in games that are a bit different, people are, what they look like. You're like, okay, well, average is 10. And so I don't actually have to create massive things most of the time. Sometimes I know it's coming and I'll have to spend that time. But most of the time, as long as I've prepped way ahead of it in advance, like, this is what a guard's like, here it is. And I can just, anytime I just pull it up and we can go. And so I like a system wherein I don't have to, where I can improvise combat, even crunchy combat, right? Like, I enjoy a good crunchy system too, but there are crunchy systems that are elegant where you can improvise combat without having to do 4 hours worth of prep of oh, what is the challenge rating for this, and how do I balance? I like a system where I don't necessarily have to do that. Yeah, it's very helpful to pay very close attention to the capabilities that your players have. This is a lot of what my prep is. So I'm not necessarily thinking oh, what are the stats of an average guard? I'm thinking, what's an easy encounter? What's a medium encounter? What's a hard encounter? And then I'm just going to throw something like that, right? And I'm usually not looking for things like, what's the CR? Because CR is...
we all know.
We all know. CR is iffy. I'm usually thinking okay, is this just a bear? Is this a bag of hit points with 2 attacks? Or does it actually have some nonsense it can do? Right? And then that'll be how I categorize my encounters. But usually it's just really quick slap, 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 write down a couple of NPC names. I usually have a 3-step, maybe a couple of step outline of what I think is going to happen. But the most important thing that I do when I prep in my very, very short amount of time is pre-type the first thing that I am going to say. This is the advice that I give to basically every GM that comes to me and asks for advice on hey, how do I get better at this? I say, well, do you pre-type your intros? And that is the number one thing that I use. It anchors me, it anchors the players, it sets the mood, it recaps everything. I can make it dramatic, I can make it dry, whatever, but I slam out 1 to 3 paragraphs that are kind of the opening narration to bring everything back together. And that's especially important when I'm doing live or streamed stuff. Pre-type your stuff so that you don't feel awkward going straight out the gate, and so that your intro has all of the information that you need to give the players for them to move forward. It's a little thing, and it fixes so many problems, and it makes everything 10 times easier after you sit down and read all that stuff out loud.
Nice.
Can I clarify my insanity? So my prep time is so long because my campaign is specifically very character heavy. If I were not doing that, I don't think I would prepare it nearly as long. but it takes forever because I have to sit and like think about all the motivations of all of these characters and all of these moving cogs. If I was just like, oh, we're just gonna have combat, I would slap out a map and I would just get a list and then I would be done. But my campaign doesn't want that. They don't want, they like the RP, they like the characters. The campaign is specifically built to be NPC character relationship centric. And so that's why I have like, that's why I spend a lot of time, because there's just a lot of thinking involved.
Well, that leads into one of the questions that came up, which was, do you prep dialogue?
Sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
I might prep something badass a character's gonna say.
Okay.
My group of players is interesting in that they very much want to be guided. They absolutely want it. So I will basically have scenes where like two NPCs will start talking, and I'd say, none of these NPCs talking, and then they'll relate information that is important, and then like involve the characters, the players in the scene, and they find a lot of fidelity in that. And then like something else I started doing was I started typing up off-scene scenes that the characters wouldn't see, but the players would want to know, which is kind of meta, but like I can do whatever I want in my game. So I'm like, here, this is, just, and they're good about not being meta. So I gave them a scene and they thought it was really cool. That just so they had more, and it helps because then they have more context for like what's going on, and it helps them like remember stuff, because I have like a bajillion NPCs, so they're like, oh, this person did that and that's why they're important. And so yeah, I actually a lot of my prep is creating dialogue, but that also goes back to like having NPC heavy campaign, which I don't, if it wasn't NPC heavy, I probably like wouldn't do it as much, but it is.
What I think is interesting is that my games are super RP and NPC heavy, and that's why I don't have to prepare very much. I only have to start doing preparation when I think a combat's gonna happen. Like if I'm like, ooh, a combat's gonna happen, that's when I'm like, ooh, we haven't done that in a while. I need to make sure I've got all those rules under my fingers, or ooh, I might make a map. So like almost all of my prep comes from, ooh, I think there might be a combat this time, which is why I don't normally have to do a lot of prep. That I'll prep for, but I am super RP character heavy, so I almost do no prep at all, and I never plan dialogue actually. So like my way of sort of coming into those NPCs is totally different. I spend a lot of time in the beginning thinking about what is their motivation, what is their personality, who are they, what do they want, what are their relationships to everybody else. But once the game starts, then it's just the consequences of what happens. Right, so I just sort of think, oh, okay, well, what happened to this game? This is what happened. This is what the NPCs know. This is what they don't know, and I just update where all the NPCs are at, and then the next game we go. And so, like, I think it's because I'm so character heavy, especially for the players. Like, I'm very interested in challenging their characters in interesting ways that is why I don't tend to have to do a lot of prep. Like for me, it's the exact opposite. If it were more combat heavy, the combat heavier the game is, the more prep I have to do, because I actually have to have things on paper that like otherwise I just don't normally have to at all. So I think that's really interesting.
No, I think that is very interesting too. I do a lot of dialogue because that's how like they get information usually. And I don't know. That's just where I find joy in it. Usually, it's like usually what happens is I have like the first two dialogue lines are the same of what I wrote out, and then it will more or less follow the skeleton of the conversation I wrote out, but with input from the players.
One thing that I will add for those in chat is that Trooper has a background though in acting and improv, so it's a very natural, an easy thing for him to roll into that, which not every DM or GM is an actor at heart, or an improv actor especially at heart. But I think a lot of them, even if they don't start there, they end up there. So it's at some point. Sean, Benjamin, you want to weigh in on any of this? Oh, we lost somebody.
Looks like Ben may have froze there. I thought he was getting ready to say something, but I
Yeah,
think
me
he
too.
was just frozen.
Weird. We will. I mean, you can continue. I'm not gonna hold it up. I'll wait for him.
You know, I can say stuff about a lot of my prep time is actually just getting into the right mental space to do the acting. And that's honestly why I like write everything out, because it helps me like just process everything. And like we don't get to all of it, honestly. We don't. And then yeah, sometimes we derail and I have to just go, this thing happened. You have to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't find myself. I do. So I think it's interesting what you said there, Tiffany, about the vignettes that you mentioned. These scenes that are not what the characters are actually firsthand witnessing or taking part in, because I started doing those as well. Partially because a home game that I was in with one of my players as the DM, he started doing it, and I thought it was very, very fun and interesting. And then the players started requesting it. They were like, "Oh, we would love to know what's going on elsewhere, like in the same time that we're doing this part." Like, and then I was like, "Okay, well, let me take this and start," because I normally only do that in one shots or shorter series things, maybe 4-episode things, because it adds tension. It brings in that kind of editor side of me, that filmmaker side, where I'm like, all right, let's get some concurrent action going on to start making people nervous. So like that's where I'll most of the dialogue prep will go in. When it comes to NPCs during typical sessions, I try to have as many of my NPCs set and defined before we start the campaign, so that similar to Trooper, it can kind of be something where it's they behave how they're going to behave. But in my campaigns, the biggest ones I've run, they've been fairly sandboxy. Even, I wouldn't consider the players to be super sandboxy, but they want to be in as close to a sandbox world as they can be. So sometimes that does result in NPCs needing to be developed frequently when they didn't exist 2 sessions prior or something like that. And that's where NPC prep, dialogue prep comes more into play. But my hope is usually I'm going to have my character dossier for them that has 5 or 6 of the typical facts I like to have about the NPC, and then be able to run with that in the moment, so that they can react a little more organically. Because I find if anytime in the past, especially when I was really early on GMing, and this is me, like if I overly focus on a particular dialogue line that I want to have in the game, I'll find myself just shoehorning it into scenes where it like isn't as impactful as a more organic line, where I'm like, this was just a cool thing I wanted to get the character to say, but it wasn't particularly useful for that scene. And I sometimes when I talk to my players, I say the same thing, because sometimes they'll come to me and say, I have this really cool line for next scene when we get into this part. And I'm like, be careful with that, because you then just are starting to wait until your line can be read, as opposed to listening to the other players, listening to the NPCs, reacting, and then you miss opportunities or miss what other people are saying.
Yeah,
That's why I also try to do the same thing.
Yeah, it's the difference between acting and TTRPG acting.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I like hesitate when I say I do a lot of dialogue prep, but that's really like it comes back to like I do it, but then like when you're running the game, sometimes you have to let it go. And like that's where, because like what is the story demanding, and does like this dialogue point enrich that? So.
Oh man, I love shoehorning in a solid one-liner. I will jam that square peg into the round hole. I do not care. If I've got an NPC and I want that, especially if I'm introducing the NPC and I've got that NPC and I'm like, oh, this NPC is gonna say something so cool. I'm getting it in there. I don't know where. I'm sneaking it. It might be in what I've gotten used to is when I'm describing the NPC, then I'll have them end with the cool one-liner. Otherwise, I might never get it, because they might decide to punch him in the face like halfway through the description.
Yeah, we've all done
So the way I handle like NPC prep and dialogue prep is I do a lot of voices. I like a voice. So on my commute, I practice my voices, and that helps a lot for getting into the head of the character, because like if I'm speaking through their voice, like I also feel them, and so I can have a natural dialogue. So I guess that's kind of like prep, but for me, it's just me talking to myself in the car. So I've usually got the voice. I might have like a basic description. I've got maybe some stats that I put together for them to like make them cool. But my NPCs are typically one-dimensional until they aren't. So I build an NPC. That NPC has a shtick. They've got like they're one note until the players start interacting with them a lot and exposing them to the drama that always follows the adventuring party. Then the NPC will start making decisions kind of like the player characters, and that's where and I am also learning what that NPC is like as it goes. So it's very introspective. I guess you could probably call it post prep in some ways, but like, yeah, I have it's so silly to say it this way, but I've like surprised myself, like, oh, he's the kind of person that would make this kind of decision. I did not realize that about this NPC, and then that's just what that is now.
Right.
So it's very quick and easy. And the other nice thing that I like about it is if I've got an NPC, since I'm only ever committing to like just a little bit, like one aspect of the NPC, if the players don't nibble on the NPC, whatever, I didn't lose any time. It's not a big deal that they didn't attach to that one and instead attach to another one. If I have to pull an NPC out of my butt, I make the players make it up. They'll be like, oh, what's this? Like, oh, I'm interested in this guy. This happened at our last session, actually. They were interested in like this bartender assistant who was trying to connive the bar out from under the owner that he'd been studying under. And they're like, oh, this is an interesting guy. What's his name? I'm like, I don't know. What's his name? Then I roll a 1d4, pick a player. Tell me one thing about him. Okay, you tell me one more thing about him. Okay, there we go. There's the NPC. We got him.
Yes.
Wow.
I'm taking that. It's awesome.
That is good.
I make them do it.
Yeah.
They make way more interesting stuff than me, other than the one time they made me play like a pervert spice trader named Hemefu who had a Julia Child's voice. We all had a conversation after that one.
All the notes stuff is brought up of one of the questions that I wanted to get to, which is, what's your best advice for capturing what goes on within a session? And this comes back to what you guys were talking about earlier with your post prep.
For me, it depends on the game. Oh, for me, it depends on the game. I need to know each game has its own needs for what I need to write down.
Yep.
And I'm just going to be making a new sheet for Traveler because I know that I need different things. But so, for example, I usually have a space for names because people ask me, I'll make up a new NPC, I'll give them a name, I should write that down. So names are usually a thing that I need to write down. And then for each game, it's a little bit different, right? So for some games, you need to know who they've upset, right? For some games, you need to know what resources they've spent or not spent. But generally speaking, I tend to only write down the things that I know I will need to know, which is usually names, any kind of numbers that I've given them. If I said that this is gonna be worth this much, I also usually write down the passage of time if it took them like 4 days to like get from point A to point B. And if I'm also going to be writing recaps, I'll just like make a couple of notes of like big beats that have happened. But I just write down what I need to know so I can write a recap for them later, and so that I do not forget names and any kind of dates or passage of time. But for Traveler, I'm going to create a post sheet where I'm going to be writing down whatever they've sold or have like any kind of like money situation. I'm going to put that on paper. And I do have everything electronic as well. So I have like spreadsheets and all of that, but I'm not usually dealing with spreadsheets when I'm jamming live. Like all that's like after game stuff. When I'm live, I want nothing more than what I can write down by hand because I don't want to take anything to sort of take away from my concentration on the players. So I usually have like my notes that will give me the ability, like, if it were a different game, like if I were running a game that had a lot of like realm management, I would probably note that, I'm gonna have to make a spot on my little sheet for that. So like, it's usually per per campaign what that particular system and campaign needs me to write down that I will forget otherwise.
I keep track of a few things. NPC names, yeah, I got to write those down in the master doc. That just is what it is. I have the players keep track of almost everything else. So equipment, values, stuff like that. I don't touch any of that. They keep track of the calendar for me because I ain't gonna do it. The big thing that I really focus on is what happened this session and what are the consequences of it. What's the fallout? That's the most important thing. Who's going to respond? How are they going to respond? And it's not. I know the word consequences is kind of a dirty word. It's just how do things respond? It could be good consequences. Sometimes the consequence of your actions are good things. Sometimes they aren't. Yeah. Just what are the outcomes? How does the world is a living, breathing place that they are messing with because they're adventurers and that's what adventurers do. How does the world push back? How does the world give way? I kind of treat the world as like the one big omni NPC, and then I don't have to think about all the other little tiny moving pieces because that's just there's so much minutia. So instead, what I think is, how would the world respond? Well, there might be some conflict here. Okay, what assets do I have available to me through established NPCs that I can then use to create that tension? Okay, what's a cool scene that, okay, there's a cool, here's the response to what happened. All right, how do I make that cool? Okay, how long do I think that's going to take? Okay, that's probably going to take maybe an hour and a half game time. What am I going to do for the other 60 minutes? Am I going to do a shopping episode? Am I going to do a vignette? Am I going to do something goofy? Should I ask the players? When I'm thinking about like what I need to do next, I'm always thinking time. What's going to happen? How long is it going to take? What's going to happen? How long is it going to take? Because I want every sit, between 2.5 and 3 hours. If I run longer than 3 hours, I turn into a pumpkin. Between 2.5 and 3 hours, and I want it to feel either like it's got a nice, clean beginning, middle, and end, even in long campaign play, or I want it to feel like a two-parter, right? Where we get to the big moment right before I call it for the night, and then we come back to it next week. Those are kind of the two ways that I think about it. So it's less like thinking about like how do these NPCs, who's got what information, how do these NPCs respond, what happens here, and all these little granular things that add up to the larger story. I think instead like, okay, what should, I guess, karmically happen now? All right, and then I'm going to pluck some assets out, pluck some NPCs, pluck some rivals, and I'm going to make them be the ones that do it. And that seems to work really well.
Yeah.
Is the question like what do we keep track of?
Advice for capturing what goes on in a session. I guess it would be what you keep track of and the best tools or processes for doing it.
My sessions are all recorded. So if I actually need to go back, I can just listen to them. Usually I can remember the important things when I write out the recap. And that's it. I just remember things, which is like not the best way to do it because I'm like, what's that NPC again? I don't know. I'll just say on like while we're recording, and I remember this is his new name, and no one cares. So,
but you write out a recap.
Usually, I can remember, but that's because I'll typically write it down later. If I know they're going to be an important NPC, then it's because I've already sunk time into them, so I know who they are, and I'm not going to forget them. But usually, I actually have a list of NPC guide for the players, and then I have NPC guide for me, and it's very extensive. And mine's extensive because I don't know, I like making it, and I make full character sheets for my NPCs because I like doing it.
That's fun sometimes. I like doing that too.
And I have just a huge I just have a huge file of all my NPCs and their stats, and I just like knowing that information. And not all of my NPCs, all my major NPCs typically have a full character sheet. But if it's just guard A, then they just have a name and they have the guard stats.
Wow, your guards have a name?
I have to make names for all of the animals too, because my players will ask.
Oh yeah, my players ask the same thing. They also ask me what style columns there are on buildings. And I have one of my players is an archaeologist by trade, so they're asking me questions constantly. But I would mirror, say the same thing everyone else has said. I think these are all exactly the kind of stuff. Especially time spent traveling, those sorts of things. The only thing I'll add is foster a competitive spirit amongst your players for their own notes so that you don't have to. Yes. And that's what I've been doing right now, and I've got 2 players who are competing over who takes better notes, and I'm like, this is great.
How did you foster that?
I don't even know. But 2 weeks ago, they corrected me on the calendar day of the game. So I was like, excellent.
Tiffany, you say that, but you take great notes.
I take
Natalie takes great notes. You drop recaps into Discord.
Well, I'm asking because I want my players to take great notes. But something I started doing was I told them, I want you to write journal entries as recaps as part of our recap. And so I'll do my recap, and then you get a recap from their perspective, which helps them as players to get back into character and to actually think about what happened. And that's a tool to consider.
Yeah, one of the tools that I use, and I think a lot of people do this now, probably forever, is I have a list of names based on areas. So I just scratch them off as I use them. And then I have name places too, in case they go into a city and I haven't prepped anything for the city. I'll have names of bars and hotels and inns and all the kinds of stuff that are typical in the type of game I'm running. If I'm running a sci-fi game, I'll have things like spaceship names, and I'll have the spaceship names by type so they sound right. They sound cool if they're like a military ship. They sound very corporate-y if it's a corporate ship, that kind of stuff. So that's one thing that I think you can do before your campaign even starts. Just put together a ton of names and have them lined up and scratch them off as you use them. It's one of the easiest things to, like they say in chat, to avoid everything being named Irvin or Tim or whatever it is that everyone falls back on. All right, the next question we have, actually I think I'm going to combine 2 of the questions. I think they're very related anyway. Do you mainly prep things the players are likely to encounter, or do you also do background simulations? I did that with air quotes. Background simulations, i.e. stuff going on somewhere else in the world. But combined with, does the amount of prep needed vary depending on the frequency of the game? If you do it once a week, you do it once a month, does that change it? Anyone want to hop in on that one?
Can you tell me the question one more time?
Yeah, do you mainly prep things the players are likely to encounter, or do you do lots of background simulations, that is, things going on in the world outside them in the world?
Okay.
And additionally to that, how does it change depending on the frequency of your game?
Yeah. I mean, if it's less frequent, I prep less. Because, words are not happening right now. But if I'm doing a one shot, I will typically have just 2. I'll have, the hook, and then I'll have choice A and choice B, and then the players will be like for one example was I did a one shot and I said, well, you need to get this thing. You can either go through Brothel Bay or you can go through the Steelworks. And of course they're like, well, so we're going to Brothel Bay. And I'm like, okay, we're going there. And players just want choices. So I give that illusion. I don't want to call it illusion. They did choose, but for my own campaign, my Dungeon Damsels campaign, they want to be guided, and so very often I just say, this is a thing that happens, and they just go with it. So typically they follow the trail I put down, but sometimes they do deviate, and usually what I do is I'll flesh out what I think they'll do more, And then if they don't do that, I just write down like a sentence or two of like what I might do and then improv off of that. Yeah, that's typically what I do with one shots. I have actually said like, I'm not gonna let you do that because my one shot is insular and I like just didn't prepare for that. So I'd prefer if you go this way. And like people are like, oh okay, like they just want to be told what's going on, as opposed, because if you're like, no, you can't do that, and you'll give them an answer, they're like, well, I don't like my choices being taken from me, that I'm upset. And so I just tell them, I didn't prepare that. That's like so left field. I didn't prepare that. So please go this direction or this direction. And they're like, okay. And I'm done. That's me.
Anyone else?
I think I'm unlike most people here in that I don't actually run good games. I run bad games that no one should be interested in, unless I'm forced to. Like unless I'm like if I'm doing a one shot, or like if I'm doing a one shot or a two shot, or I'm very specifically being asked to run a narrativist game, I just run bad games, and by that I mean I don't run games with stories or plots. I'm not going for any arcs. I'm not going for any kind of big moments. I do not, none of that. I simulate a world and then people do things. Now, if I'm running a one shot or if people say, please, let's do a story heavy game, then I will do all that stuff that people ask me to do, which is usually a lot more prep. But I don't. So I never plan what's going to happen because I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't plan in terms of arcs. I don't, when I'm GMing in my preferred space, I do not treat RPGs like theater or film. I do not use narrative structures from traditional narrative structures at all, unless I'm being asked to run a game that does that specifically, in which case I will. But if I'm running in the way that I want to, I don't. I really, really don't. So I don't worry about whether or not this challenge is hard or easy for the players. I think, what is the challenge that this would be in the universe? And the players then decide what they're going to do about it. They may decide to run away. And then if they do, then they do. And then we find out what happens next. And I don't think, well, here's going to be the big high point. I just think, well, we're going to find out what happens. And maybe what happens is that, I mean, I've had moments where the big bad gets killed in episode 2, like pretty easy. And like, well, that's what just happens, you know? And so like the way that I tend to run is a style that is not good for a lot of people. Like I'm going to just note for a lot of people, my style that in my most comfortable style is bad for a lot of people and they will not enjoy it. So they should not play with me. But in that, like, I'm just like, I am very, very, I think one of the best things you can do as a GM is to be aware of why people would not like to play with you, so that you can like make sure that you can match right people. And also if I have players who want that other style, I'm conversant in that style so I can GM in that way. I just don't tend to want to do it for a long campaign. But so because of the way that I GM, which is not about arcs and stories, but it's about simulating a space, I almost do no prep in terms of this is what will happen because I don't know what will happen until we get there. I do, however, do a lot of background prep of what is happening in the universe. That is what I spend. So it's more post than it is prep. So the players walked in and they just shot so-and-so. And I was like, well, okay, so now what does that mean? So they just shot so-and-so, and that person so-and-so is the only person who could have gotten them out of trouble with such and such. Well, okay, that means that that person is now dead. That means that this faction is going to want this or that, but nobody actually knows the players did it. So they're going to probably want to go and start investigating who did this murder. Okay, so I know that's happening. And then and my players sometimes get away with such shenanigans because I'm always like, okay, what do these people in the world know? They know this, they don't know that. This is what they've heard. This is what they're doing. Here's what they've all done. And then we go to the next episode and I find out what the players do. And it turns out they've blamed orphans for the murder. And now the orphanage is going to go, hey, that's what they did. I don't know what they're going to do. They blame the orphanage. And now the orphanage is going to be shut down. That's the I'm always about basically post consequences. And I'm almost, when I'm running in my preferred style, what happens is what happens. And I never know what's going to happen until we get there. And this is it's a very weird thing, but there's a book of the I Ching it's a famous old copy of the I Ching that had Carl Jung had a foreword that he wrote to it, and my dad had it, and I remember reading it, and the foreword said, this was like written a long, like the 30s probably, and he said, Jung was like, why is it that like throwing yarrow stalks or tossing coins can say something about the universe? How does this work? And this is well before chaos theory. And he says that basically there is nothing is random. Everything that when you throw out random things in this moment, they are representative and they are symbolically representing the moment that is happening. So you just have to understand what those things are. In many ways, this sort of ends up like lining up with some chaos theory that happened, 50, 70 years later in terms of thought. But so for me, the way I ended up taking that was that I never roll dice before the moment. Because if you roll the dice 20 minutes before the moment, it's not the right moment. Those dice will represent not the right moment. And I never plan what's going to happen until we get there, because I feel like if I plan ahead of time, I won't be planning in the moment, right? If the universe has a thing going on and the dice happening in the moment is indicative of what is supposed to happen in that moment, then I actually cannot prep. There's just a lot of stuff I can't prep at all within this sort of like, I was like 12, I read it, it made a big impression on me, right? And so, it just did. And so I'm like, when I'm running in my preferred style, in that comfort space, there is no prep. It is almost exclusively, unless I know unless they're walking right into a battle, so I got to set up a map and I make maps and whatever, and stats. But I in the last session we had in Traveler, I set up a whole big map for combat and all the people, I knew what was going on. And like when we ended that session, a shot went off. So I was like, okay, we're going to start this session in a combat. And the players dropped smoke grenades and left. They left the entire group of people there to fight these two. They set these two factions, and including somebody they're supposed to rescue. They're supposed to rescue somebody. And then a fight happened. They're like, ooh, these are people with lots of guns. Smoke bombs. And then they left. And I was like, wow, okay. They just left. And so I did a bonus session where I actually ran through the combat once the players had left, because I didn't want to decide by myself. I wanted the dice. I wanted the moment to let me know. And I found out what happened. But so like for me, I just never know. I never know what's going to happen. I know what's likely to happen, maybe, but I can never really tell. So almost all of my prep, almost all of my work is post background workings. Like, oh, they don't have food. They're going to do this. It's almost all like, let me do the next step of the simulation and find out what's happening now that the players have blamed the orphans for the serial killer. Hey, they did it. Okay. And then let's sort of go from there. And so it's interesting because I never plan. I always post. I think that's the best. I mean, I do some pre, but it's almost always like, oh, they just won an award. I should make a prop for that. You know what I mean? That kind of a thing.
What about you two, Sean, Benjamin? God, I forgot what the question was almost.
Yeah, Trooper, I think you and I might be nemesis. I think you might be my arch rival. I contrive a great deal, and a lot of, because I'm all about beats and story hooks and arcs and campaigns and stuff, but I differ from a lot.
Both ways are very valid, by the way, just so the audience knows.
Totally,
they're both valid ways.
100%. Yeah.
His is more valid than mine.
No, I love a good simulationist GM, and I like playing in that sort of. I'm a very different player than I am a GM, so I always want different things. But no, I'm all about like theming and like mood and tone and beats and arcs and all that stuff. So usually when I'm preparing things, like I have how the campaign, I usually have a set piece, and I'm like, this is where this is going to end up. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but this is how it's going to end up. We're going to construct events over the next however long we play this campaign to be, we're going to fight a dragon on the volcano, and the dragon is a hardcore determinist, and so they have to not only fight the dragon, but also have a philosophical shouting match with it. That's what we're going to do. We'll figure it out as we go. And then I might have it split up into some arcs that also have similar, like, large narrative beats that I want to arrive at, and I'll figure out as we go. And I might split that into smaller and smaller arcs. But when we're talking like session by session prep, my secret, I just ask the players. I just a lot of times at the end of a session, I'll be like, hey, what should I prepare for next week? What are y'all gonna do next week? So that I can just have that ready. And they'll be like, oh, we were gonna do this, or even a player might say something like, oh, hey, I'd really like to have an opportunity for this thing to happen for my character, or for this thing. And it's all just a very open conversation. Like we're all writers collaborating on the script, right? So I ask them, like, what are we doing next week? And they'll be like, oh, well, we had this and this happen, so I guess we're gonna go blow up that building or whatever. I'll be like, great, I'll make a building. Easy. I know exactly what's going on. And then we show up the next week. I'm like, so you guys gonna blow up that building? And they're like, oh yeah, we were gonna blow up that building. That sounds fun. Can we go blow up a building, guys? And it's like, yeah, awesome. And yeah, so they do all my work for me. Basically, I just
my players would not blow up the building. They might say that they're gonna blow up the building, and then they wouldn't. I'm just gonna note it.
They have done that for me before, where like one player was like, "Hey, I know we said that we were gonna blow up the building last week, but actually I had a better idea. I want to do this, this, and this." And I'll be like, "Okay, everyone take a smoke break. Give me 15 minutes. I need to redo my prep for the week." I have had to do that. I have had to, when they throw me such a wide curveball, call for a break and take. I think it was they wanted to like infiltrate this place through the Undercity or whatever, and I'm like, okay, that sounds fun. I'm into that, and I had an idea for how the Undercity worked. I haven't built it, so y'all get a snack. I'm gonna make a dungeon in 20 minutes, and I did, and it was fun. I use a lot of random tables for stuff like that too. I'm a big random table boy. I love them. You go on drive-through and just get like those 50-cent like 100 things you find in a place. Oh, I have so many of those. It is I must have hundreds of those. And I'll just be like, oh, weird random creatures you might find in an arcane zoo. I don't know when I'm going to use that, but let's get it. Thanks. 25 cents. And then but then like, you know, a year after I bought it, they happened to go to a zoo, and I'm like, oh my god, I have the right table for this. We're doing a zoo vignette. Yes, vindication. So,
a quarter well spent.
Yeah, so I have like my North Star that I have in mind for how I want certain large story things to happen. And it's very easy, as long as we're always basically walking in the vaguely general direction towards that. I don't care what happens on the ground level. So for, whatever is 6 inches in front of our face, I just figure out like what the players want to do, and then I build that for them. And if they throw me for a loop, whatever, go get a Mountain Dew and I'll build something else. It's not a big deal. If we're streaming, it's a little, I usually have to be like, okay guys, like get with the program. But that's one-shot prep. That's a totally different kind of prep.
Yeah. I mean, I think to round this out, I feel like I find myself in my heart of hearts. I am in Ben's court there, and then in practice, I find myself much more in Trooper's court. I thrive off of beats, story, arcs. You know, I teach screenwriting, so I'm like, it's the stuff that's melting in my brain at all times. So I think when I prep, I find myself doing week-to-week prep, a lot of posts, like Trooper's saying, where I'm like, okay, this is what they've done, these are the results of what they've done, and how does that calculate into these 3 parts of the place they're in, you know? And then there's another part of me that is then going like, okay, what's the contrivance of these 3 parts that then like, and what beats do I see those 3 parts like pursuing themselves as like factions or whatever type of, because it's obviously it's different. You're playing one TTRPG versus another, one setting versus another. You know, I find myself often playing in long fantasy-based campaigns, despite my preference, truthfully, is actually like shorter science fantasy games. Is like what I tend to like to play, like as far as like in short games where I'm like, we're only playing for 3 to 5 sessions, like that's it. That's the space where if you're really into arcs, you're really into beats, that space is where those things shine really bright. Whereas whenever I'm in a long campaign, my brain is going story, beats, arcs, but then the form of the campaign bucks against it as they're in a town and they can do whatever they want in it. I've prepped it in a way where they can do whatever they want in it, so they're gonna do anything they want in it, and then the prep comes into that post again.
It's like narrative TV or movies versus reality TV or movies.
Kind of.
Like,
I mean, reality TVs are slightly manipulated, not in the same way that you edit a normal show, but like they just as many times as in they take takes as well in reality TV. We're like, okay, that was really great, but you need to be angrier. So let's turn this around. Everyone back to one, which obviously we can't do that in live streaming.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
All right.
I mean,
What can
I will just say I will note that I do absolutely, if it's a one shot or if people want that, I will go and give them the whole classic 5-act arc and all that. But for me, it's I have my background is not as a screenwriter, but as an actor of a more sort of like as a sort of like a nerdy actor.
Like
so for me
kind of stuff.
No, but more like. Rather than, I also was taught method, but whatever. But I was more interested in classical, where what you do is you sit there and you do character analysis. You're like, who is this character? What are they about? What do they want? Rather than let me go do sense memory and like find out when I was really sad and then I'm just gonna be really sad. Rather than that, it's more like, okay, well, who's this person and what are they about? And let me look at the text. Like, oh, okay, here Othello says this and this, so this is what Othello is about. And this has resulted in if you get me GMing in my element, right, which is certainly a sandbox and it's simulationist, but it's character simulation. Yeah. So what I'm most interested in is who are the characters, right? I don't care about the plot. The plot for me within this medium is whatever the players do. That is the plot. What I'm interested in is who are they? So if somebody says, I'm a character who loves my mother and would never kill an orphan, I'm like, is that true? Let me see. Your mother kills orphans. What do you do now? Oh, it turns out that you're like, I care about my mother way more than I care about orphans. I was like, interesting. Now we know something more about your character. And so any kind of pre-prep that I do, right? If I think about what is my prep rather than my post, my prep is usually who do the characters think they are? Who have they said that they are? And how can I find out if that's true? How can I set up a situation wherein who they think they are is going to be challenged? And I always do it when I don't know the answer. I'm like, well, I want to know, will they do this or will they not do that? And then I set up a situation where that will happen. And then I find out. And then it turns out that they are exactly who they think they are, or they aren't, right? You know what I mean? And now they become someone different. And so for me, the main thing I do when I do prep is mostly, who are these characters? Who do they think they are? What can I do that will give them an opportunity to test who they are? And then we find out the answer to that question. And so it doesn't actually work as an arc. Like, I don't necessarily think, oh, here's the arc. You're going to start here and you're going to end here, right? But more like, well, this is who you are right now. Let's see if that's true. And then maybe it is, but maybe it's not, right? And I'm always about like, what is that moment? I was like, okay, so this character seems to be a little bit sociopathic. Let's see how that goes, right? You know what I mean? And will you, okay, and you are like really innocent. All right, let's see how that goes. And for me, it's all about, I'm like, let's say I'm more of an actor's director, right? In the sense that like, I'm here for my players to explore their character in a deep way and to challenge their character's thoughts of who they are. And the way that this is tricky is because I don't know the answer. I don't know if they're going to win. I don't know if they're going to be the hero or not they're going to collapse and fall. And I never plan for an arc where you start the bigot and then you go through your whole thing and you end up being redeemed. Because I don't know if that's going to happen. I have no idea what will happen. And I like it when the players don't know either and we just find out. And sometimes it just goes a way you just don't think it will. It would not work in a film, but might work in a soap opera, right? Because soap operas have a very different sort of way of telling stories. Yeah, so like my prep is mostly about thinking about how to open up the bloom of the character around me, right? Like, okay, well, you've never used needlepoint. Let me see. How can I get that to happen? And then it turns out, like this is a moment where I was running a game of people who were all cardinal. It's like swashbucklers for musketeers, but they were the Cardinals Guards, and it was like the French Foreign Legion, but back then. And everybody was actually a secret agent for some other power, but nobody had told anybody. And one PC was a Jesuit priest, who was a spy for the Vatican. And in this particular adventure, there was a demon who was possessing the person they were supposed to protect. And this player character could have outed themselves as a priest and done an exorcism. And they didn't, because they didn't want to let anybody know that they were working for the Vatican. So they just let this demon just do its thing. And I was like, well, now we learned. Ta-da! And so for me, it's always about like, that's what, and that was not a satisfying story, but it was really interesting because now there was a demon that was let loose upon the world, and our priest didn't do anything about it. It was good. It was the whole campaign changed. It was good. But so for me, that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested, like my prep is like, what can I do to bring out your character?
Yeah, and you can get a lot of interesting, I think, subversive stories out of that I think are not following the traditional, like, because like that's what this is why I say like my heart wants to do all these things to prep, but then my actions bring me more closely in line than that, because I think there's just more because you can get really, and I think like what you said there, Trooper, satisfying, like, because there is the satisfying story that is good, like, and then that's the thing I'm saying, like, that's not bad, but I'm really curious about what else can happen. And when I'm talking to my players about it, something that we did before this campaign is I said, okay, you know, we have this very classic thing of like people say, what does your character want? And I said, that's fine and all, but I need you to start thinking in scenes about how you want the people around you to feel and how your actions, like, how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? Like if you, like, I want X so that X player will do this for me. Okay, how are you going to make them feel to get them to do that?
Yeah, and I will just say, you cannot do that if you have less than 6 sessions, I find. Right, so that particular thing that I really enjoy doing, I cannot do unless I have more than 6 sessions, because you just don't have the time to really let the characters marinate for that style. So that's a style that I can only do for longer campaigns. Otherwise, the payoff's not there. You know what I mean? Like, you just don't have the... It's a slow burn. It's a slow burn.
All right, we do need to take a break real quick. Let's take 5 minutes. We'll be back in a little bit. See you in a few, everybody.
Can I add something from the last thing?
Sure.
Okay, so I had thoughts. I'm taking notes too right now. So we've been talking a lot about the like difference in like GMing styles, and I think a lot of that really stems from the needs of the players, and like that how to determine like which jamming style you want to do is really determined on like the needs of the player. Because, like, I tried to do a sandbox world at the beginning of my campaign, which, you know, was really aggressive because I'd never, like, you know, GM'd anything and had no idea what I was doing. And I was like, clearly, sandbox world is the best choice. And all my players were like, we have no idea what to do. How do we do things? And I'm just... So, it just didn't work out for my specific player group. And it has changed over time. But now they're so used to my, like, style of, like, here is the path, and they're like, great, we're happy to go on the path.
Sandbox players are very proactive. They will make stuff happen all by themselves, whether you do anything or not. And
they're also quite rare, I think.
Yeah,
Scott, am I a sandbox player?
You're a great sandbox player.
Oh,
because you start stuff, you do stuff, you don't sit around and wait. You know.
Yeah, so if you want to see that action, you can watch Mists of Elixir, or you can watch Troopers stuff.
Troopers stuff has a great game. Like, I saw an episode that Trooper ran, I guess it was 2 months ago, that was just, it ended in a drug-addled, like, scene that was just amazing, and I was enthralled by that scene after it was towards the end of a campaign. It was... wonderful.
No prep for that, because I didn't know they were going to go and like open up the drugs and put it in the air, and I was like, well, now you did. Okay, then, like, you put these highly powerful drugs in. Okay, well, here we go.
That actually leads to our first question for the moment, which is the hardest type of players to prep for. Any examples from games you've run?
Wallflowers.
The player that doesn't know what they want.
Oh, yeah. Wallflowers.
I love my wallflowers and I love my indecisive folks, but like a whole table of them is my personal nightmare. I would simply not know what to do. I'm perfectly content. I'm not gonna cast aspersions on any play style, but like I'm perfectly content if someone's like just happy to just sort of hang back and interact now and again and you know do their thing and just is kind of there for the social aspect. Maybe is just like unwinding or enjoying or prefers to just sort of enjoy the story. But like if there's too many of those, it's like, well, who's driving this, right? Who's driving this bus? So that can be very, very challenging to prepare for, because they're also, it's not necessarily bad, but they're also just sort of into anything, so they're also not like motivated to want things. They just kind of want to play, and that's where their motivation ends. And that's, if you've got one or two and everyone else is happy to have things that they want and is driving stuff forward, that's no problem. If it's a whole bunch of them, oh no, it's tough. It's tough. It's challenging.
Yeah.
I think I will say, to sort of piggyback on what you're saying, Tiffany, not for me, it's not indecisive. It's the people who are lying to themselves about what it is they want. People who are like, I really, really, really want no combat, all RP. And then you give them that and that's not what they want. Or they're like, I really want a really deadly game where I want all the consequences. And you're like, okay, then you give them that and they get mad. So I like a player who knows what it is they want. Yeah, because if you let me know what you want, I can give it to you, right? Like if what you want is like the most like dungeon crawl thing forever that's like super aggressive, I will do that for you for like a 4-shot. I will not do that for a full campaign, but I can do it if you let me know what you want. But if you say you want X, but you really want Y because you do not know yourself particularly well, or you want to be the kind of player who is like this, but that is not the kind of player that you are, I find that really difficult. That's the hardest because I'm prepping for what they say they want. I was like, you say you want this and I believe you, and then I prep for that, and then it turns out that is not what you want. And that is, for me, that is the hardest, because I try really hard to be responsive to what the players say they want. And then if I do all that work to give you what you want, but that turns out that's not what you want, like, just let me know you want a zig a zig ah. And then like, just tell me what you want, what you really, really want. We can do that. So like, for me, it's the player who does not know themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I've had 2 players like that. Like unfortunately, like the first player was just like, I just want to leave, and I cried, and I was like, okay, I'm trying. And then like the second player, like we tried like so hard to like try to figure out like what she wanted to do, but she just like she lost interest in her own character. And so then like at that point it's like out of my hands, and she wanted to play a new character that I loathed, I hated, and I had to be honest with her. I'd be like, I will kill her. I hate her. And she's like, really? And I'm like, yes, I'm sorry, I cannot DM this character for you. But it became a moot point anyway, because she's like, I have a new job and I need to work on my new job. And I'm like, yes, be an adult, that's great. So like the point of this is like, sometimes it is the best solution to just let them go.
Not every character or player fits every GM. And if you never learn anything as a GM, learn that. You don't fit every player and they don't all fit you.
100%. And I think just echoing all of that, yeah. Like I've had, in the past there's been players where it's just sort of like, yeah, you're after something else. And sometimes it's you're not even after a game. You're after like kind of your own, you're looking to write a book, and go write a book. We're playing a game that happens to have some narrative aspects to it. So like that's probably the player that's hardest to prepare for, who's not really looking to play the game. Actually, they're really looking to fulfill their own fantasies in their own way that is separate from the interactive aspect of a lot of tabletop games. And I want to be like, there's some really great single player. There really are some really great single player TTRPGs that I think you would really enjoy. It just seems like you don't want to have and oftentimes I think it's that they're players who want to have complete control over their narrative, and I understand that, but it just makes it real difficult for someone to prep for you, and you say one thing, mean another thing, really want to narrate your own destiny.
There's a
I'll go after you.
Okay. There's a corollary actually. So that you're sort of dipping into that I was going to kind of, so like we've got like our players that don't want anything and our wallflowers that are just sort of happy to be there, and they're finding good and harmless. But then there's also, how do you prep for players that have protagonist energy? And they can be a real challenge because in one hand, a player protagonist is very easy to prep for. You just need to dangle things in front of them and they'll get all protagonisty on it. So it's actually, if you've got someone who's kind of got that really forward-thinking protagonist energy, like spotlight hoggy, usually what I do is I prep around the other players and assume that they are just going to work their way in as a supporting character at some point. And then now and again, because, obviously they're going to be talking to me in DMs anyway, because they have protagonist energy. So they'll be talking to me about stuff they want to do. Eventually I might like prepare something that really centers them and their story every so often, just so that they can really get that big, I'm the main character. Because there's nothing wrong with wanting to be the main character now and again, and people should really get to enjoy the spotlight. So what I do is I try really hard, like I'm going to prep stuff for all the other characters based on their needs, and you just be a good supporting actor, and then we'll do your thing down the line. I'll sprinkle a little foreshadowing for them too, just so that they always feel like, oh, my thing's coming, and that seems to work fairly well. But yeah, it can be very easy as a DM to fall into the trap of, oh, this person has got it under control. I'm just gonna let them run the whole thing, and then they're having fun, but the rest of the table isn't. So yeah.
So I did find a way to sort of find a good middle ground, at least for some players who are very creative writer energy. 'Cause I have like almost all of my players have been that, and one of them, she was like, I made the entire town that I came from, and here is all this background information and all this stuff. And I was like, great. And I just said to her, we will get here eventually. And we did. And it was great because there's a whole town that was already fleshed out. And then I said, there's a lot of stuff here and I just don't know if we'll actually like get to it or if it will be relevant. And I think that since I just prepared her for that, she was like way more open to that experience. And so now we have a Viking town that has a bunch of dire wolves and everyone's a barbarian and it's fine. And so that's Marcus. That's how that was born. There was a lot of communication between me and her off screen about like how we wanted things to go, and like it was a little frustrating because we did have like points where like we did kind of step on each other's toes, but it is a dance in that sense. And now we're kind of like basically like over her like main arc, but she's just like, I'm 100% happy, that was great. And I'm like, okay, awesome. So just communicate with your players a lot. I feel like that's the biggest thing I've learned as a DM, because when you enter the DM seat, you're like, I must plan everything and keep everything a secret. And just don't do that. Just don't. Just say, if you don't know about, if you're not sure where you're going to take their character, just say, I don't know yet. Because that was like a huge problem for like the warlock I had, but then she left. But her character is still relevant in the story because, just because someone dies doesn't mean they're not relevant anymore. But I should have just told the player, I literally don't know what to do with your character yet, so please just wait till my brain thinks of something. And I think she would have just been happier that way. So, because otherwise they're gonna think that you're like keeping things from them. So just communicate.
There was a question that came in that I think is a pretty good question. Do you remember how much prep you put into your first game or your earliest games, and did it go the way you expected?
I have all my notes from every session I've ever GM'd, other than like really off the cuff stuff. So as soon as I saw that question in the chat, I was just like, I'm just gonna pull up my notes from that very first session. I mean, the very first time I GM'd, I was like immediately, you know, like a lot of people who want to sit in the GM seat was like, I'm gonna make up the entire world, and went immediately into world building mode. That was like not, you know, some of it was relevant, but I wouldn't say, you know, most of it wasn't necessary for the first session. So the actual notes for that first session that I would consider the actual prep, I honestly, I think I took, you know, I spent, you know, maybe an hour or two on it, truthfully. I wrote down the primary thing of it, and looking at it right now is what to say at the beginning to get it going. A list of NPCs, a few possible encounters, and some possible rewards. It's a lot more pages than my notes would be now, I would say. And I'm actually looking back and I'm a little surprised how many pages it is. Because I'm like, I don't remember any of this coming up. But this was like 5 years ago, I think, that I ran this. The first time I was in the GM seat. And I remember being incredibly nervous about if it was enough. And it clearly was more than.
Yeah, people underestimate how long everything takes for when PCs are involved in it.
I just looked at my notes for the first episode of the Dungeon Damsels campaign, which was my like premiere as a GM, and it pretty much did go like as planned, because I just had a lot of things happening and they were reactionary. The things that didn't happen were like random snippets of like NPC interaction. So I don't know if that's super common, but it did pretty much go as planned for me. But we also did have you know, pirates attack. So, you know, they just had to jump into action. That's like the
Right. Yeah, orcs attack.
I'm
Pirates
pretty
attack.
sure I'm pretty sure the very first thing I ever GM'd was the adventure for more than one person in the red box D&D, which is just a module, so you just do what it says. So yes, it basically like that was, you know, and that's the thing. I will say this: people like to talk. Some people like to talk smack about D&D, but D&D tells you exactly what to do if you've ever done it before. And you're just like, here's the thing, and all the players do exactly what they're going to do, and you're going to do exactly what you're going to do. And you like, they walk like, especially old D&D, where there really is no story besides you go into the dungeon, you go down the hallway, you go into the door, there's some monsters, you kill them, you take their stuff, and rinse and repeat. And so, yeah, I'm pretty sure my first adventure did not have a lot of prep. It was mostly just thinking, okay, let me make sure I've got it all, like I made my printouts, right, on the little photocopier, mimeograph, whatever it was. So I'm pretty sure that one did. I think everything else was like, once I got away from that, though, when I'm making my own adventures, then it's like, prep becomes very, very different. Then I'm like looking up train tables in 1937. You know what I mean? Because that ends up being how I am.
Physics of something that you think's gonna come out.
Yeah.
Every DM or GM is probably on the FBI wanted list just for our Google searches.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yep. What state? What does 2 weeks of body decomposition look like? How do you make a bomb?
I think actually, like my second session, I think I did look up something about that, because I was like, they were doing something where they needed to make like some kind of explosive, and I was just like, what are the actual ingredients to an explosive during this time period in history?
GMs, you don't actually have to know that. You can just roll a check. I'm begging you. Can just
No, it's the immersion. They must have their immersion when I say you need to get this material from this
ruining
candle
every
maker,
GM.
from this.
Quit ruining every first GM's experiences with the knock on the door from the CIA or the FBI. No, that doesn't actually happen. They do figure out that we're just running games, I think. I hope.
Well,
You
everything
say
on Google
that, but
says
there's
5e next to it.
I hope.
But you say there's that famous incident, right, where the FBI, well, it might have actually been the Secret Service went and raided Steve Jackson Games because they thought that the book on cyberpunk that they were writing was an actual manual to really hack in real life. Yeah, that's what caused the founding of the EFF, is because the Secret Service came in and confiscated all their computers and all their manuscripts because they thought this fictional RPG was a real thing and wouldn't give it back. And they're like, and so then, the founding of the EFF they got their stuff back, but then their book was released late, blah, blah, blah. But,
Great
so it certainly does
press for your
happen.
first game, though.
Yeah, right.
They were just trying to finish up their campaign before they surrendered the materials. That had to be what it was.
Right.
God, the earliest sessions for me. When I was a young man of 13 years old, on the unrestrained internet, that's right. It was Microsoft Internet Relay Chat. That's where I got my start. I started online at 13, running games on Espernet in MIRC. I should not have been doing that. I should have been supervised on the internet. That was before the internet had laws. And it's I'm really fortunate I didn't get trafficked. Instead, I just turned into a big nerd. Those early ones when I was like a little kid, those were bad. They weren't prepped. They were bad. I didn't know what I was doing, obviously. So I would say like the first thing that I would say that I actually did prepare and actually spent time on, I wrote when I was in Afghanistan. I was deployed doing security detail for a civil affairs team, and there was a lot of guard duty. So when I was in the guard towers, I'm pretty sure I have this. It was a big, like, legal-sized notebook that I was just writing all of my world building stuff in. I spent an entire year on this thing, preparing this really long level 1 to 20 campaign that I wanted to run when I got home. I think it's still in my Afghanistan box. I should dig that up just to see if I can still read my handwriting. But then I got home and ran it for 4 of my friends, levels 1 through 20. Took about 3 years, and yeah, it pretty much went the way I thought it would. That's where I kind of got the foundations for my current prep style, which is basically just a more efficient version of, build out the world, figure out the rules, figure out how everything works, and then, get your North Stars, get your guideposts way off in the distance, and then whatever happens between point A and point B, that can kind of go case by case by case by case, and it worked out really well. Everyone liked it. They still talk about the campaign, and so I kind of got lucky. But I had been playing for 7 years and cutting my chops as a very bad game master online, like a really, really bad, immature, no idea what I was doing game master on the unrestrained Wild West early days of the internet back in 2002. So, yeah, I'm gonna end up tearing my entire freaking closet apart trying to find that book now. So thanks, Scott.
What service were you in, and what was your MOS?
Oh yeah, I was in the Army.
MOS?
Infantry.
Yeah, damn, you're a badass and everything.
Yeah, that was 04, 05 I was in Afghanistan.
Army, military intelligence, 90 to 94.
Okay, all right. Yeah, no, so we could not have been further from each other.
Speaking of the post-prep, do you use either stars and wishes or the equivalent of to kind of get data from your character's post-session and use that as part of your prep for next?
I tried to. My players hated the label. But now they were like, I don't want to do that. That sounds dumb. That's silly. And I'm like, no, it's good. Just get. But now they just kind of do it anyway. We just don't call it that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Players are weird.
I don't super love the name either, to be honest.
Yeah, me either.
That's why
There's a
I'm
bunch
like,
of different ways to call it. Stars, wishes, rose, thorns. I heard recently weevils and something else.
yeah,
Dungeons and Dragons. That's one that I've heard is very popular.
I just started off with I like asking specifically, what did you like that another player did? So then they're focusing on not themselves, but like the other players. And then
That's what I do too.
Yeah, yeah. And then everyone feels validated, and it's really nice. And then they'll ask me, and I'll say what I liked. And at the end, I ask them, "What do you want?" Like, just straight up, what do you want?
What do you want from me?
Yeah.
Why am I here?
Pretty much.
Yeah, we do stars and wishes right now. I think in the past it was more it had been informal, like everyone have a good time. Like what did you like? What did you not like? It was a lot more informal, and I found from particularly like you're saying as the GM, it's good to get the straight feedback. I prefer my preference if I was just me dictating the law to them is for them to say something they liked about another player. Because I think that is a really great way to do the stars portion of it, and then whatever their wish is, we talk about that as well. So when we do it, they do their stars, and it might be something I did, it might be something about the session, not even a particular player, a particular scene, and then I'll make sure when I do it that everyone gets some kind of little shout out in the stars portion.
It's also just a good way to like check up emotionally with your players, because that's something we don't talk about in the community as much, and I feel like we need to talk about that more. It's just like having emotional checkups, be like, is everyone good? Do we feel okay? Do we need to talk about anything? And just fostering an environment where players feel safe enough to talk about that. And if and even just saying, hey, if there is an issue, DM me, just communicate with your players. Just do that.
Yeah, safety's super important.
I like to do the I always have my players give love to someone else. I also do a thing this is more prep than post. I always ask them a question at the start of each session. It's a thing I started doing where it's like, okay, introduce yourself and then say, what is your character's favorite breakfast? Or what is the circumstance in which your character would kill someone or would not? Like, I always ask them some sort of question that will that I get, and I always take notes on that. That's always a note that I take. I was like, okay, you don't want to be put in a situation where you have to dance. Got it. I know what's happening next season. Whatever it is. I always ask them some kind of a question.
The escalation from what's your favorite breakfast to what would it take for you to kill was shocking.
So
I'm totally stealing that. It's a great idea.
No, it's true, because we used to do that in Paradise in the beginning, where it would be like, all right, would you start with me, and I'd say, ask a prompt to someone, and then I have them ask a prompt to the next person, and you would get escalation like that, where I'd be like, what's your character's favorite cocktail? And then it's like, would your character ever do this? And it's something terrible, but
yeah.
But it's a really cool idea. It's a good way to warm people up too.
Yeah, and also it also is I also did that because there are some players who will not give you backstory, so I can just get it in the moment. I just need to know if there's anybody you really upset when you were a child. I just need to know that for later, right? So it's a way for me to get the hooks that I can do to play with them. But also with my crew, I could ask that question, but I also had to flip it for some of the players because they've killed people quite a lot. I was like, okay, what would it take for you not to kill someone that you really think should be killed, right? And then they're like, you know what? If like killing them would harm my fellow player over here. I was like, interesting, right? So like, I just want to know those things, yeah. But I usually end up give some love to somebody else, and I try to do that because I like to end with a nice big sort of round of affirmations. But I always pay attention to whatever the players are saying. Whenever the players have a theory or they're saying those are my notes. I'm like, players, I don't need to know all the other stuff. I need to like, players think that this is going on. I take all of those notes because that is for me all the kind of them just sort of speaking from off the top of their head. That's the stuff. Because when you ask them sometimes what they want, they may not tell you. But when you listen to them talking about the things they're excited about or they think is happening, that's always what I take notes on.
Yeah.
That's also really helpful because you'll hear some DMs will be like, oh yeah, if my players have a good idea about an upcoming plot twist, I'm definitely going to steal that. Now, I'm not a big fan of doing that necessarily. Like, if they guess the twist, congratulations, you guessed the twist. If they come up with an idea that was better than mine, I might use that some other time or with a different table. But what I can do sometimes is I'll hear them if they have a theory about something that's coming down the pipe that is just completely batshit insane and is going to be a total divergence and is going to be like a giant waste of time and unsatisfying. Then what I can do is I can be like, oh, they think the Duke did it, and we would have to spend an entire session having the Duke like getting into the castle for the Duke just to find out he didn't do it. I can then like seed in the next session like some reason to give an alibi so that they don't pursue that line. Like it might be like, oh yes, the Duke just came back. He couldn't have done the murder. He was in the Virgins Hills for a fortnight. He could not have killed the Countess. You know, that kind of thing. That way, I'm prepared for them to also not go off into the winds.
Yeah, I think that's important. Paying attention, as you're both saying, to what they're all theorizing about what's going on, because it's also a good way just to catch when like something's just been completely miscommunicated.
Yep.
You know, where like they misheard you when you said a certain name or a certain place, like, or one character's like, I thought this was the group that was doing that. No, it's the other group. You wrote one note down and it just hasn't come up since then, and now you're going off of just what you misheard. It's good to be able to correct that, either, even if it's in character, correcting it in some ways to make sure that they don't go on wild goose chases that are just complete red herrings that aren't even meant to be red herrings.
Or reinforce things that you think should be a higher priority for them. I'll see that a lot, where you'll be like, oh, you find this like scrawled note that has a hint about the bad guy, and they'll be like, oh, neat, a note, I read that. And then they'll put it away and forget about it, and it's like, oh, okay, they're not talking about that. They think the drama's over here. It is not. I need to reinforce this somehow. Like, yeah.
Yeah, the equipment bag. Things that get lost in the equipment bag is always a part that needs to occasionally be reinforced in some way to remind them you've got the sending stone.
Yep.
Yeah. So the next question I have is, and I think I know the answer on one or two people, but I don't know for everybody. So, do you draw from real world history, like a la George R. R. Martin pulling for the Red Wedding, the Black Dinner, or the Massacre of Glencoe? Do you look at that as prep for certain events or backgrounds to your campaigns or your games?
I don't look at specific events. I look at specific timelines in a culture that I like then steal and like mix with another culture to make the new culture. Like my drow are like Maoist Chinese mixed with like General Irish. Those are my drow. And then the human kingdom is like the Arcanic Empire is like Japanese in like Spanish, Edo period, not Edo period, like the one before that one. So in that sense, yes, I don't look at specific incidents. If it's very specific, I will try to. Like, for example, in my campaign, we had a noble killed in foreign land by like another noble, but she was actually lawfully doing so, and so it involved like 3 different like nations, because she was a noble of like she's a half elf who was a noble human and a noble elf, and so the human kingdom and the elven principalities were like, how dare you? And then it's like further made messy because the drow that killed her was like, she was doing stuff, she was being a criminal in my space. And so I was like, how would anyone even deal with this? I'm like, what is so I had to like look up historical references on how that sort of thing was handled. And so in that sense I do. If it's very specific, I do, but otherwise it's more of like a general approach of like, this is what people did in this time period, in this, in this country. It is based off that. So yes and no.
The last big grand campaign I ran, Lawful Great Adventures, I didn't base anything on history. I don't know what it was. I was in a big philosophy kick, and so it was philosophy and tarot were the two big influences that I was using. So the divines are all based on the tarot. There's 22 gods, one for each of the major arcana, and then the way governments and cities were structured were kind of like drawn from various philosophical thoughts, and my brain was basically like, okay, let's take this zany idea that like Plato had. Okay, what if we actually tried to do it? Or what if Aristotelian virtue ethics were true and you built a city around the idea of this is an absolute true thing about these people, that like this is morality, it is objectively good to do it like this way or whatever, like, and then you just keep asking what if, and then eventually you have a world. But I didn't really base it on anything specific like historical events, because not a big reader over here, basically.
As you speak about philosophy, somehow you learned that. So at some point you were reading or taking a class.
Is in the ears.
Okay,
ears.
Nice.
The audiobooks and the podscast.
Yeah. Sean?
Though I don't tend to George R.R. Martin it, in the sense that I don't tend to think, oh, I'm going to do a fantasy game, but I'm really going to be doing the War of the Roses. If I'm going to do the War of the Roses, I'm just going to do the War of the Roses. That said, I use real world stuff all the time, mostly because I'm often doing a whole lot of games set in the real world, or the equivalent thereof. Like, and my players know, and my audience knows, there was a time when the players needed to go to an airfield to get an airdrop from my World War II resistance campaign. And I went and I found, don't ask me where I found it, but I found somewhere on the internet a list of every single location that had airdrops in it during World War II in France. And I was like, look, I said that they traveled this length of distance to get to this airfield, and I found the airfield that it would have been. It was this farmer's location. So now I knew exactly where it was. And yes, I gave them actual reproduction handbooks of the SOE.
Awesome.
And yes, I found, yes. But the reason why I do this is, I know this sounds, and look, have I spent sometimes 12 hours making a reproduction of an award? Have I figured out exactly what the font was for the London Times so I could then find a way to make it so that my players have their names in the London Times from the actual London Times, because I still have an institutional access to historical newspapers? Yes, I have done all of that. But here's the thing, though. Two things. One, it saves me on session prep, because I just have to look up the historical New York Times from 1933, and I just read the newspaper, and I'm like, oh, there's a plot, there's a plot, there's a plot. That's some excitement. So it saves me all sorts of session prep, because I can just read the newspaper. And two, and this is like a weird thing, but not all of my players have picked up on it yet. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's about the secret Easter egg, that if I'm drawing from the real world, that means they can look up things from the real world and incorporate those things so they can get spoilers, if that makes any sense. They're like, wait a minute, a train is going through this place at this time. I think we can do this thing. And so by using the real world in the way that I do it, I sometimes, there was a thing I did for a campaign. It was like a short shot where I found an actual human being that existed in the real world that was like a CFO from some company. And I actually used that person, and I took all sorts of stuff from their webpage, like their corporate webpage, incorporate into my game, so that if the players had decided to go do a web search for this person, they would have found clues for the campaign that existed in the real world. And so I do that all the time as like a Easter egg for any players that might want to decide that they should do a web search on the things I told them, and they can find cool stuff. And that's like a little game behind the game thing that I like to do. And I do that because I will sometimes just set things in the real world.
It's your pro meta. It's cool.
Yeah, that I all I want to do now is play one of Trooper's games. It sounds so exciting.
Cool.
And I love that. I can just, all right, this person, yep, okay. At 5 o'clock in 1972, they were here. So we can be there. That's super fun. That sounds super fun to me. For me, I'm not often basing things on like historical events. The only kind of like real world research I typically do is like when I want to know like in the world that I've set them in, like with the technology in that world, is it realistically possible for X to exist? You know, or what were with this technology available? What was housing like? What was shipping? How long did it take to get to this place with this type of ship? What can I ostensibly take this real life invention and create a magical item that is interestingly replicating that? But you can ask any of my players, the most common thing you'll find in my worlds that is based on historical fact is just labor movements. I tend to have a lot of labor movements in my worlds that are happening and affecting the politics of a lot of the regions that we play in.
Player driven or driven by plot?
So often driven by plot, but I want right now there's a little bit of it that can be. So a really fascinating thing my players gave to me in our before this campaign, which was when we did our lines and veils, was one of my players was like, we don't want there to be like explicit like sort of racism, these sorts of things, but if there is any sort of marginalization happening in the world, the only thing we ask is that we are empowered to fight against it, to stop it, to be empowered to be a part of that. So often there are these labor movements in my games, so I'm very excited to see if the players will push themselves into that. You know, in our last campaign, it was very much high fantasy adventure, so there wasn't. The labor movements were there. Don't worry, they were there, but they were much more like I'm the wizard. You know, now they're more like, yeah, I think we're going to be nibbling on that in this current game that we're playing.
Yeah, I remember MCDM did. They had guilds that I thought were very interesting. Like they had one called the Broadsheets, who ran what were the equivalent of newspapers in a fantasy setting, and they were basically the purveyors of truth, because most people believed what was in the newspapers, but they were totally corrupt and very easy to, if you had the money, you could manipulate what everybody believed through them. And I thought that was a really interesting way of controlling it. But then the truth seekers, the ones who worked for the paper that wanted real truth, rose up at some point. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to see in a fantasy game, because you rarely think of unions happening in a fantasy setting up until, at least the 1800s. Then you start to see, the fear of technology giving rise to increasing the idea of wanting to work together to work against something. But I think it's very interesting. It's a powerful, interesting tool in a setting where it is unusual. So I think that's really cool. I did want to kind of show off some people's notes and stuff. I know Trooper was trying to get something to me, but I can start off with some of the other stuff and let people ask questions in chat if they have anything about what they see in ways people prep on paper or in notes. While I'm doing that, though, I did want to ask a question while I'm bringing that up. And I think it's an interesting one because we all have various talents. And I thought of it when I was looking at all of your bios and stuff on Twitter and places like that. Things like your personal capabilities, actor, singer, dancer, composer, musician, writer, blah, blah, blah. Do you incorporate that into your games? And when you find out a player has some of those, do you try and incorporate their capabilities into your games? Like for Sean, I know that Shannon is a tap dancer, but I haven't seen her tap dance in your game yet. But I mean, there are other ones that might lend themselves more broadly to a TTRPG.
Yeah, I will if I feel like they fit the medium of the game. Like as a player, I feel like I can do it easier because as a bard, I just sing. I've sung in Scott's campaign as a bard multiple times.
Yeah.
Beautifully. I enjoy it. Thank you. And when I started my campaign, I wanted it to be like a musical campaign, and I couldn't like orchestrate it very well, and it came up as kind of like awkward. So I think you have to really like feel the mood of your game and whether or not that like works or will feel more like a shoehorn. But in the sense of like creative writing, yeah, I absolutely did, because I had a whole town built for me, and I said, okay, yeah, we're gonna use it. So my answer is yeah. If I can figure out like an organic way to incorporate it, and if it will enrich the experience, then yes.
Cool.
I think we bring. I mean, I know this, and I'm sure a lot of other GMs are like this, but I bring a lot of the soft skills from my background. So like, I'm not gonna play trumpet at the table, though. An NPC died on stream once, and I pulled my trumpet out and played taps, which was very funny. That was hilarious. But like, my background is education. My profession is I've worked a lot in like sales and stuff. So I've worked with people my whole life, and so I lean really heavily on how I interact with people, how people think, the kinds of things people say, the kinds of things people say that they don't really mean. You know, the little lies, the big lies, like all this like human interaction, like psychology stuff. I really lean heavily on that, which means my NPCs are usually really compelling, that people like them, because it's like really easy to like capture someone's essence when you just know people really well. But like beyond that, I'm not really a composer. I'm more a performer, and it's not the kind of instrument that you can just sort of pull out randomly, so I don't really bother with that all that much. But I think everyone, like, from their work is going to bring soft skills, is going to bring the kinds of things that you develop as part of your day-to-day life, just working in the professions you work in. You know, so if you've got a film background, you're going to have a sense for certain things compared to someone who does creative writing, compared to someone who does music. Trooper and I were joking in the green room about how I'm an improv-heavy DM because I'm a jazz musician, which they've got some DNA in common in some weird ways. But like, maybe it's kind of like that. But it is very helpful, for you, dear listener, to know some of the things that you're good at, that you have a lot of experience in, because that is not only something that you can lean on when you need something to lean on, but that's probably going to be something that you're just going to default to. So if you're a teacher, you're probably going to default to teacher habits when you don't know what else to do while you're GMing, because that's what you're used to doing. So just like know that about yourself, I guess, bestie.
By the way, chat has been funny as heck tonight, all night. I'm cracking up at almost every comment.
I never make my players do anything. I feel like consent for everything. You know what I mean? Like if players want to sing, then I'm like, you do it. I will support you. I would love to be able to bring more of the things that I do to the game, but Disney has made it so that copyright things used to go into the public domain for 25 years after publication.
Yep.
So you just have to wait 25 years before you could use music. And that's not the case anymore. You have to wait 75 years after the person has died.
Yep.
So many of the things I would love to do, I cannot do because of the terribleness of our copyright system. However, music from 1924 and earlier is now in the public domain, which means I could probably make an epic game set in like 1920. And I could then actually, what I've always wanted to do is to like have a game that uses music, really like period music, really, really intensely in like really cool ways. And now, finally, it's been just this like basically since last year, I can now do it. So I can now finally bring all of that early jazz knowledge that I have to a campaign. It'll probably be like a 4 or 5 shot, but I'm gonna run something that's set somewhere in the late teens, early 20s, because now I can finally do all of the cool soundtrack stuff that I've been wanting to do all this time. But you know, if I were a literature person, this would not be a problem. That's all I'm saying. But because it's music, I don't. That's all. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of same thing. I don't really, if I know a player has an interest and or a skill and they want to lean into it and they express that, then I'll lean into it. I think the closest thing I have to that right now is I do have a player who is, by trade an archaeologist. So like even though the characters he makes are not like I know that player loves exploration is their favorite pillar of D&D.
Yeah.
Which is rare to find a player who's gun-ho about exploration. So even if he's not playing characters who engage in that, I still like to give him some extra little flair in the exploration area, even if he's like, I love it, but my character does not really care about that. And I'm like, all right, but I'm still going to tell you it because I know you like it. And if he ever wanted to make a character that was very heavily inspired by that, I would love to encourage it. And if Shannon wants to tap dance on stream, I'm all about it. I'm all for it. If you can find a way that I'll let her be a tap dancing bard in a one shot or a full campaign. I'm all for it if there's ways to bring it in. As far as myself, I have always I feel kind of a similar thing to Trooper there, even though I don't play a lot of stuff that's in history times. I wish I could bring more. Like the copyright stuff is absolutely something that's killer sometimes.
Yeah,
where I'm just sort of like, there's so many cool things I could specifically do. We could incorporate this in some way that just is not allowed. Just that's it. It's just a period at the end of the sentence that is unfortunately not beyond that. It's the same way I feel being a filmmaker and I'm editing something or I'm writing a script and I'm just sort of like, well, that would be really cool. But I don't have that budget that Stranger Things has, or whatever it is. So, that's always present. But I think I do find myself narrating often my GM stuff in a very similar to the way you would write scripts and write action lines in scripts. And I'm very visual and auditory in that sense then often. So that stuff definitely comes out in my own GMing style, I find. I did have a player once who was also a filmmaker. We'd get into these riffs occasionally where we would suddenly like kind of stop doing the typical like, oh, I grab my sword and he'd be like, and the camera, zooms in on this part and then this and then it cuts to this and I'm like, yes, and then this and that was fun. That was something we used to riff off that kind of fully brought our skill sets of shooting video and editing into it in a fun way that we didn't belabor too much but would occasionally get into.
I think Ben really nailed it on the head with the soft skills stuff. Because I started thinking about, I'm like, wow, wait, geez, what even is my background? Because I've worked in a lot of different fields. I'm not even working right now because, well, husband makes enough money, so why am I working if I can just be creative trophy wife? So that's where I'm at.
That's my dream.
Mine too.
I'm living the dream. But I did do a lot of music, and so I still do a lot of music, and that means a lot of practice. And how do I prepare? I just do a lot of practice.
Nice.
So that's that the hours I was talking about. It's just me practicing.
So
there's
go on.
There's kind of another dimension to this too, which is it's not just necessarily about the kind of skills that you have or the kinds of things that you're good at, but it also has a lot to do with the types of media that you like. And I'm not just talking about genres. I'm not just talking about like, oh, do you like books? Do you like this? Do you like that? The example I like to use a lot is I like really long music. Okay, I'm classically trained. I've got two degrees in music, so I've been exposed to a lot of music. And I like music that takes 45 minutes to deliver like a really, truly amazing moment, right? And I do not mind that it has to get there. So like a really good concept album that's going to wind up like with something really... great example, Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon ends on Eclipse. transcendent moment. The first time you listen to the album, beginning to end, it's a completely different thing than if you just heard that track on its own, right?
Yep.
So that can be symphonies, that can be concept albums. And so I have found that when I am preparing things, that is sort of something that I'm doing when I'm putting games together too. I'm preparing in the style of the media that I like. So symphonies, they have a lot of musical foreshadowing. They have little snippets of things that are going to come up later on, little themes and motifs and stuff that you're going to hear later in a different way, in a conjoined way. Like they're going to deliver on some of these musical promises at the end, and that's going to kick ass. So like I use a lot of foreshadowing. I use a lot of thematic motifs. I use a lot of like repetition. I'll bring stuff up. There will be symbols that will just like players will get attached to, and they'll be like, oh, you keep mentioning ravens. This is the third session in a row that we've seen a raven in this one place. Is that a symbol? Is it a hint? Is like something going on there? Like, and I'm just sort of assembling the images in the game to represent the way I want the players to feel and to act, and how I want and what I want the themes to all sort of end up being at the end. And that's something people don't really talk about a lot, is not just what you bring to the table, but like, what do you like? That's really important.
Yeah. I have notes up from the Red Rock Part 1.
Ah, that's me.
Do you want to talk about what they would be seeing here?
So this Red Rock is a one-shot that I ran to showcase. It was on the Gremlin Collective, network. That's Glyza. If anyone knows classical Glyza, they are a dear friend of mine, and we wanted to run a one-shot with Soul Muppet Studios' new game Inevitable that just funded on Kickstarter. If you haven't heard of Soul Muppet Studio or Inevitable, maybe you've heard of Orbital Blues. They're the ones that did Orbital Blues. Unbelievable game. My favorite release of 2022. I think it's one of the best games I've ever. It's fantastic. Dripping with the good stuff. It's awesome. Awesome game. Great studio. The person who runs it is wonderful. Anyway, sorry, I'm a fanboy. And so Zach sent me the quick start guide and the working doc so I have the like current version of Inevitable. It's on a Google Doc right now. So and I have it. And so what I did was we put the players together, and then I needed to prepare 3 hours of material. That's what I needed to prepare, was 3 hours of material. And I've done enough one-shots now that I've gotten pretty good at how much you can actually have in 3 hours. Usually I split it up into about 45-minute chunks. So we've got the way the scenes are lined out. You can see I've got all of my notes written out here. It starts with what I'm going to say up top. So this whole intro, hey everybody, it's me, TTBenjamin, taking over Glyza's channel, etc., etc. This session is part of what we are thinking is going to be a two-parter called This Red Rock. We are going to do part 2 eventually. We're just, scheduling issues. I've got a poem. This is an excerpt from The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot in there. But all of this, you can see this whole page ending right in the middle of page 2 is stuff that I scripted for myself to say. Because it's a streamed game, I'm trying to show this game off. So I'm like, I'm going to come out and it's going to be great. We're not going to have ums and ahs. I'm not going to look confused. I'm not going to be like, oh, what am I doing? This is my first time GMing. No, I'm going to be like, boom, Mr. Professionale performer. Like, it's going to be good. So I wrote all this stuff down. In the description is everything all the players need to understand the background of the situation, understand the mission, the stakes, everything's in there, and introduces a couple of characters. Once we get out of the intro, the notes are very basic. I have a couple of NPCs outlined and just some basic details about them. We can see here's Sir Eli and then Sir Eli's 3 buddies. That's their ally. We have the town of Crescent, which is where the thing is taking place. And then there are 3 little notes about like they're called aesthetics. There's 3 little notes where it's just like, here's some interesting things they might see. And then here's some interesting scenes that I might put in front of them if they're having a hard time like getting their grips in the setting. I ended up not really having to need to use the scenes very much because they just got in and ran with it. Like I kind of knew they would. And then my last thing is I have my beats. So my 3 beats were, we're going to get to town. We're going to talk to this Duke. Duke's going to lie to them about the cannon that he supposedly has. He's going to blame the rebels for taking it. They're going to go track that's beat number 1. Also, the Duke's an asshole. Beat number 2, they're going to go track the rebels down. They're going to find out the person running the person in charge of the, quote, rebels is actually the former sheriff who got ousted by the Duke because he's corrupt and he's actually working for the rebels. He took the cannon and sold it to the actual rebels. Oh, they're going to go, and then finally, they're going to go chase down the train, and they're going to retrieve the cannon and kill the head of the rebel thing. That's 3 hours. Boom. And that's what we got. Wrapped it up in about exactly 3 hours. But yeah, that's the notes. It's a lot of what I want to say, and then I just want to know the beats. But all the little things in there, I'm just like, how are we going to get to the next beat? That's it. That's what I'm thinking. How can I make this scene interesting? How can I put like a want or something? How can I respond to like what the character's doing? How can I make things feel dynamic and reactive? And then how are we going to get to the next signpost? It takes some player buy-in to do that. Usually what I do is beforehand, especially when it's a one-shot, I tell the players like, hey, I'm sending you to this town. It's got this NPC, and this is going to be your goal. That's
yeah.
And usually the players are like, oh, yeah, okay, cool, awesome.
Yeah.
For campaign play, I might be a little bit looser, but if I've got something in my head where I'm like, we're playing for 3 hours and this is happening, I'll straight up tell my players, like, this is what I got prepped, we're doing it. And then they just know. So, yeah. That whole thing is more prep than I usually do, and it's about 4 pages, and that is 3 hours of play right there. In a very light system. I need to, combats are resolved in 1 or 2 rolls. It is very, very lightweight system, very easy,
Nice.
very narrative system. So, like, that's 3 hours right there. So usually I think to myself, like, okay, 3 beats, each one's 45 minutes long, that should be enough.
Awesome.
Yep.
Let me bring up the next one, which is Troopers Prep. Let me make sure that the window is showing. Actually, give me 1 second to make sure that it.
It's 22 pages.
Yeah, it is.
Because
it's big.
I'm a tryhard. And it's got images, so it's a big document. That is a true statement. I can also, if necessary, I can also just put it in my Dropbox and send you a Dropbox link as well.
I got it, but it's just give me a second to make it connect. I may have to connect something else to make it realize I want to connect to this other thing.
Yeah,
There
it's
it is. All right, it's up.
Okay. So this is 22 pages of stuff. And these are just like sort of thoughts, right? Because I just do different things really depending on, is it a one shot? Is it a not one shot? Is it live or not live? But just giving a sort of a sense of what it is that my prep is, because all of my prep is mostly before the game starts, right? And I sort of start off with a pitch. I always have to think, okay, like, what am I going to do? What is the game I want to run? And then I make a pitch. If it's for a fixed group of players, right? Like if there's a fixed group of players, then I usually give them 3 pitches, which are not particularly long. I was like, here are 3 different things. What do you want to do? We vote on it, and then I do that. If it's not for a fixed group, I will come up with a concept of something I really want to do. Like I really want to run, like I have not yet done it. I've not made the pitch yet, by the way, but I do want to run the Dallas RPG from like 1982. And so I will make a pitch for that, and then I'll send it off to players who I think would be really good for that 1982 nighttime soap RPG that was a failure. I just have to so I make a really good pitch for it. So that's like what you get in like page 1 is like the pitch of like, this is what my pitch looks like. When I'm pitching to somebody, this is what a pitch will look like. Right. And then once I get my pitch in, then I make my introductory handouts. And my introductory handouts is usually something that will get them excited for the game and let them know what they need to know before we get to session 0. right? If it's a one shot, it's usually something like I have an example of this of a fake letter that I sent to the players for something is wrong here, which they don't need to do anything beforehand, but they should have like a mirror and like a cool piece of clothing, right? And so I gave them this kind of mysterious little letter to let them know, like, oh, here's what's coming,
Right.
and a little bit of a lines and veils thing. But then for the next page is what it's that is like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages, which is what I do. I create a show Bible, or when I'm doing a long campaign. And the show Bible is going to have like a cool image. It's going to have like an introductory paragraph like, hey, get excited about the show. And then I'll tell them the dates, the times, where it's going to be run, what if there's a session 0, if there's any tech they need, how much I'll be paying them. Then I'm going to get like I want them to fill out, this is like usually a Google Doc. I want them to fill out their name, their pronouns if they want them aired, their PayPal email so I can pay them, character name, pronouns, any kind of special things I need for like casting stuff. And then I usually have a call sheet with all of the dates, and I have all of my players, and this is the thing I bring from theater. I have all the dates. I was like, this is a 20 session or a 16 or a 12 session thing. Here are all the dates. Please put an X when you can make it, when you cannot. So if you cannot make it for a session, I know well in advance so I can work around it, right? And then I usually give them links to the campaign assets, PDFs, the Discord, the Zoom, the Roll20. Then I usually have my big lines and veils situation, lines, veils, invitations, things that they want to see, heads up, because I run a lot of really heavy games. And so I'm like, hey, heads up, in this game, it's a zombie apocalypse game, so there are going to be zombies. Or in this game, this is World War II, so there's going to be like some genocide and all of these things. So I usually let people know heads up for things that I know are going to be in that campaign. And they can also add heads up, like I'm playing a character who's doing this or that. And in this one, which was Midsummer Mysteries, it's set in Victorian England, so there's going to be class inequality. So like I make sure, for me with this one, I make sure that everybody has buy-in. Like if you're going to be in this game, you're consenting to class inequality because that's what's happening in this game, that sort of thing. And then I give them any kind of information they would need about the world so that they can make the character concept, give them questions, thoughts, right? That goes on for a bit. Then I have to make assets, right? Like I have to make assets for Roll20 for like, if it's a game that has cards, I need to make those cards. Which this is for Something Is Wrong Here, which does not have a digital version. So I made a digital version from the PDF. Right. And then I set up a really nice sort of page for the players to sort of come in, and I made all that ready, safety tools. For Midsummer Mysteries, which was afterwards, I usually will have like that one has a play mat where all their stuff is. And then of course there's like I usually have a screen where I can put images for them, or maybe like combat maps. And if it's going to be streamed, I need to make all of my OBS overlays, right? And I usually make a sort of like a good series of them. And then I do the prep for me, because all that stuff is all the stuff that has to happen, or else the show will not go live. And then everything else for me I do right afterwards. And I usually will do like a control sheet where I have one sheet where all of the important stats I need for the PCs are all in one sheet, so I can look at it and be like, oh, this one has arachnophobia. This one has a health of this. So I have everything I need in case, like I can just remember, oh, this is this person's like trouble aspect, so I don't forget to use it. I have everything I need to know on one sheet, so I can have an overview of all the players while I'm playing, so I know what's going on. And then I will often have these, after that I'll have like combat sheets, where I'll have like just a sheet, and that's the next one, with, these are like general, this is like four pages. Yeah, 4 pages of these combat sheets that I'll make at the very beginning of the campaign. These are thugs, and there are like 10 of them. And these are all the stats you'll need in one little thing for thugs. And I just have this, and I can use this for the entire campaign. The minute they go around somebody who's like thug level, I'm like, pull out my sheet, just tick off. I've got a little hip hop points, bow, bow, bow. And so I don't actually have to prep combat really at all for anything that's normal, because I've got these 4 sheets that will take me for the entire campaign. And then after that, I've got a session sheet. This was for Night Witches, which was a World War II game that I ran. And I had this for each thing where I would say, okay, the name of the session. This is like both post and prep. I'll say like where we're at, what questions I want to give them, any missions I've done. And for this particular game, because it was about these Soviet airwomen, I went and I did research, and I got quotes from the actual Soviet airwomen. And I started each session with one of these quotes from one of these people, because I want them to know that these are real people. And then I just sort of note what's going to happen in that session, either what will happen or then what did happen afterwards. production notes that I need to remember to say that there's this thing going on, right? Remind them to look at the eyeballs in the camera, all these like announcements that I have to do, right? Things I need to remind myself to do afterwards, game notes, debrief, all that stuff. And then I do any prep for me. I will like run through combats or just make sure especially if it's a new system, I want to get all the system underneath my fingers. And then the last thing is props. If it's like, if important PCs, I might have like a pipe for one or a hat for another to sort of symbolize those particularly really central important NPCs, and I'll have those things. Like I have right now, like my fake cigarette for that particular NPC, and then I will also make in-person props, or I'll make props, digital props for this one. And this is the props you're seeing there is for my French Resistance campaign, when one of the characters was given a mention in the dispatch, which is the award you get before you could be given anything else. And if you get it, you get this oak leaf. And so I got the picture of the oak leaf. Somebody has to write a recommendation for this award. So I wrote up the recommendation form from this person that the PC almost murdered and was trying to undermine this whole thing. Them writing this recommendation, like, this is why I think this person should get this award. And then I made the actual certificate of the award. I found out what it looked like in 1942. And then I also found out who the Secretary for the State of War was and what their signature looked like. And then I used vector graphics to make a copy of their signature so they could have the actual signature on their form. Don't ask me why I did it, but I did. And then I went and I got the actual
GMs. That's what makes us what
yes,
we are.
I know.
I love it.
Yeah. And then I ended up with getting the actual PDF of the London Gazette from the time period when the PC would have been in London. So it could have been like when it would have happened. I found the exact one. I found the one that had the space, and then I matched fonts, brought it up in GIMP because GIMP is free and Photoshop is not. And I actually just then put in her name into the newspaper from 1941 so that you could look at this newspaper, right, and see what was actually there, and then just see her name there and another NPC's name. And then I packaged all that up, and then I sent that to the players because it happened. You know what I mean? And I was like, and I've written diaries. Yeah, I've written diary entries. I've written poems. I at one point in time for one of these games I actually wrote an entire diary that was written in hand from this one NPC who's gone missing. And then I actually secretly wrote things in the spine. So if they happened to look at the spine of the diary, they would have seen symbols for like that would indicate the date of like, it was all like astrological. So like I will do some prop things. And those are like, that's basically all of the kind of stuff that I will do for prep. And once all that's done, and I've really sort of thought through who wants what, where they're at, what's going on, and then I can just go.
Yeah, you do all your prep, most of your prep pre-campaign, which yeah, I do a lot of that stuff. I have like big booklets that I hand out to players, PDF books and stuff. All right, Tiffany, you want to go over, this is like an episode recap, and I think these are important because people forget how important what happened, like what you're talking about earlier, Trooper. Yeah. The post is where it's at for what you need to do next.
So we're looking at episode 80. What's the title of the document? Oh.
Episode 80 recap.
Okay, all right. We were in all right, we're in episode 80. Okay. So I'll just go with my recap is just this top's paragraph here. And I read that. I started doing this more recently in the campaign where I start with the recap, and then with recap I wrote, and then read aloud the diary entries that the players did, so that we have context, and then we have more personal input, and then I just have scenes that I just jump right into. Like Canaris is one of the players' boyfriend, so of course he's gonna come over and say hi to his girlfriend, or and
wow, something weird just happened.
Then
we lost something.
I just have like these scenes, and I can jump around them, the next thing that happens is they were riding on dire wolves, and I thought it'd be fun to like this. This goes back to the player who made like an entire town. She also had like details on like how each individual dire wolf mount like behaved. And so I thought, oh, I'll just go back to that. And I found the dog that is like a problem dog and will like eat stuff. So I was like, okay, well, this dog is gonna get into like the rucksack and eat the rations and get sick. So that was just something fun to do. And I did that because the players really like all of them really love animals. So it was, you know, again, catering to just your players and what they want. And then usually what I do is I give them obstacles. Like right now they're just sort of traveling, so they come to the river, and I mean they just gotta cross it. They're like, we're just gonna swim across it, and they're like, okay, great. And then we get on to day 2, and you kind of read it on like I prepped like Dozer has a -2 con because he's a fat dog, and then another dog only rides well with someone else, and then you know, another dog's prone to like wanting to go and like sniff the bushes, like go off and just do its own thing, like explore, yeah. And a lot of my notes, like I have a lot of just snippets that usually actually kind of get cut out. Like here's dialogue that another one of the boyfriends was gonna say, because like I said, NPC heavy. They're all getting boyfriends. So his name is Galak, and he talks about how his dog Ku has never been one for playing, but that's a dialogue that never happened. So there's that. Then you kind of read the room on where the players are. So I skip things and just have them get places. And then I'll introduce NPCs, and they didn't really latch onto any of them, so I just kind of, you know, go on. And this was the episode where they were going to go to... they were going to do this big thing. Yeah, we've been leading up to it forever. There's a big court case, and the player that the court case is, like, about, she's being tried. She's like, I feel sick, guys, so I'm gonna go to bed. And I'm like, great, take care of yourself. But now I'm like, what do I do? So at this point, I basically just deviated from the entire script and just made problems for them to solve. And it turned out to be like, oh, we need to stall the trial for our lawyer to show up because they're not here yet. And so, you know, my players were like kind of like, what do we do? And when they're like, what do we do? I'll have one of the NPCs say, well, we could try this. So one of the NPCs said, well, wouldn't it be a gosh darn shame if there was a huge traffic jam in the middle of town? And that caused like everyone else to be late too. So team traffic jam went and just caused a bunch of problems in the middle of town. One of them pretended to get hit by a car. Another one of them cast plant growth. So all the carts and horses got all tangled up. And then there was another plan where they're like, oh, we're going to run a fashion show. And I'm like, sure. Because they're a bunch of fashionistas. They have nice clothes. So that's where, you know, we just kind of deviated and ran off. And
yeah, your episode notes are basically episodic to what you're doing. They're parceled into the parts that you know you're going to need and what you have already experienced, and you know that you're going to have to remember. Sadly, you have to remember a lot, I think, after 3.5 years of running it.
Yeah.
Sean does one thing, too, that I think is very interesting. He bridges... I don't know how he figured out how to make it work, but he bridges digital and traditional tabletop by actually using miniatures in his game, like on a table. And it is pretty spectacular to see. You should definitely check out one of his games. I love seeing like real miniatures set up for a game that's basically streamed it really gives it a standout appearance, I think. Very few games do that.
Yeah, I mean, I it's part of it is that I have the privilege of working video production, so I have a decent camera set up that I can do to have some viability there. But yeah, no, I built my own black box for the mini setup with and I had a real janky cardboard one for a long time, and then finally I decided I was going to get some boards of wood and some. I ordered the blackest black paint. I got some stuff attached to it. I've got lights set up in there. I've got a black light in there for certain setups. It could fit a certain size, and I have, I really, I as much as I can do in my apartment, I'm trying to get like a as much of that battle map experience as possible. I do a lot of crafting of terrain. And a lot of painting of monsters and stuff like that, and characters. I really, really like to have the battle map present, because I think, it depends. That's a argument for every table, is if you want physical battle map, you want theater of the mind, those sorts of things. I can operate in both, but something that I like to do is have that really aesthetically pleasing battle map that has the fog machine going on in it, that has the light setup, has the black lights. And my particular table really gets a kick out of it and really loves it, and particularly prefers to play with an actual battle map. So if I can create production value there, as opposed to having it be just sort of a dry erase situation, which of course there's nothing wrong with that, but I just become obsessed with the production value when it comes to that. So I'm like,
And the minis always look awesome. They're painted beautifully.
Yeah, I've got a
I don't know.
Yeah,
setup over
that's
here,
awesome.
I don't know anybody else who does that, by the way. I know I see people playing all the time, but they're either in a room together and they're streaming together in one room around a table. And sometimes there's minis then. But when they're all in different places, I've never seen anybody else use miniatures and still make it work. And you're the only one I've known that has done it, has succeeded at it.
Yeah, and it's definitely not easy. And I think it comes from the fact that in my home game before I started streaming, my big thing I love to do was to craft things, build terrain, have this very visceral table experience, and we had to translate that to virtual for the pandemic, and that translated into we always had remote players. That's the thing. Before the pandemic, I still always had remote players. So I always had to set up a camera for the battle maps I was building. So I think that's why I kind of came into it already being like, yeah, well, of course I'll do that. Like, that's just what I already do for people. So let's just make it work for the streaming setting and have a situation there.
The thing that's on screen now, this is a booklet that I used when I ran my sci-fi Esper Genesis game in 2019, I think. But I run a lot of different campaigns, although I've been running a D&D campaign that's nearly at its conclusion, and I'm going to be running a bunch of smaller campaigns, anywhere from 5 to 8 episode kind of mini games in different systems. I want to run a bunch of other stuff, and I do run other stuff too. But in this is basically a player guide, and I go over. Like, I pulled stuff out of the game, and then I put my own spin to what I wanted it to do. So, as they go through, this I gave them so they would know what's in the world around them. Because nobody had ever played it. They didn't know anything about it. Some of them bought the book, but I also changed stuff that was in the book because I'm a home brewer and a world builder at heart, so I can't leave well enough alone. But as you go through it, you can see I rebuilt their map. So honestly, I wanted it to look more like a traveler map because I like the old traveler maps better than the one that they had. Although the one they had is beautiful and very painterly, I wanted to see sectors and things like that. So I built my own damn sectors. I took all their content. I built in lingo and common terminology, kind of like when people play, for instance, Cyberpunk. You really do need some kind of a guide to language around it for people to really immerse themselves if they want to, or else it sounds like modern, not sci-fi. And I want people to immerse themselves as much as they can and want. So I do the same thing. I think it's very interesting is I do design work outside of this. I'm a creative director for an agency. So I'm always looking at adding props and stuff, kind of like Trooper does too. To me, it comes naturally, and I can't help but do it. So we have gone super long, and I apologize to my guests. This is definitely way longer than I've ever gone, but it seemed like it could not stop because it was just too juicy to let go. I hate to say it, it was just too good to let go. I'm gonna let everybody kind of go around. Let me go back to my main screen and say where you can find them, what they're doing, and let everybody go to bed. So let's go in reverse order. We'll start with Sean this time. We'll go around counterclockwise.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Sean O'Donovan. I've been loving this conversation. I really enjoyed it. For those of you here who I haven't met before, this was lovely to meet you and talk to you about all of this stuff. It's always super fun. Loved seeing everyone's notes for stuff. I really love I love the story. I know this is a good Bible, but I just wanted to say I love the story Bible aesthetic there because I teach story Bibles in my classes, and so super cool stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, and especially when I saw the call sheets, I was like, okay, yep, I've made those, plenty of those.
Like, I'm telling you, call sheets change everything. It's the way to go. It's the way to go.
Totally.
It really helps. It really helps.
But yeah, I'm a creative director over at Paradise Productions. We currently are just running one sort of home-long campaign right now, but we have other shows in the works. We had a show back in January that we were really excited to bring in new people, new voices that were not our typical crowd. We have another show in development right now for the summertime that had to go on hiatus because the DM had some life stuff, but we're getting back on track for that. Super excited. We have another show in prep for probably late summer, maybe early fall. It's going to be Quest involved, and we're trying to get a lot of new folks on stream. And I'm currently taking on the editing process as well of turning our VODs into more digestible material. So that's going to be my summer. So check us out. We're at Paradise Pro, or some places Paradise Prod. I'm Odo_Sean at all socials. And I just had a blast being here and appreciate everyone sharing stuff.
Awesome. Thank you. Benjamin.
Hey, yeah. Hi, everybody. I want to take a quick moment and just sort of synthesize something that's kind of been going on in my head. You'll notice that this whole conversation about DM prep, we've spent a lot of time talking about player interaction and all that other stuff, and DM style, right? And here's the thing. I think why a lot of people struggle with prep is because they think that it's this like grand nebulous thing and you have to have all of this stuff prepared. Oh, I've got a session this week and I don't have anything prepared. Where do you even start with that? And prepping is a very personal process. And I think it's really very useful, especially if you're just getting started and you do want to improve at your skills of running games, is check in with yourself and figure out, ask yourself legitimately what makes you anxious about preparing and what do you actually enjoy about preparing. And find ways literally to circumvent the stuff that you hate about it and lean in on the stuff that you like about it best you can. Whether that's offloading stuff on players, whether that's just not
always
doing
a great idea, by the way.
Yeah. Anytime you can offload stuff on players, just do that. That's fine. Hey, we're all supposed to be equal at the table, right? And DMs are players too.
It's collaborative.
And prep should be part of play, right? Prep is not the thing that you do before you play. Prep should be a form of you playing. The thing that really jumped out with me was Tiffany was talking about like how much prep she does, how much like time she spends doing it. But that, to me, in my head, I'm like, well, that just sounds like part of you're enjoying the act of doing that, right? That's what it should be. It should be part of play, and it should be for your table, and it should be week to week, and it should be person to person, and it should be for your table. There isn't a set way to do it. There isn't a set way for specific DMs to do it. I prepare based on what I'm going to be doing, whether it's one shot, whether it's long form, whatever. So. If prep is the thing that's kicking your butt about running good games, then check in with yourself. and figure out what you can change about the prep. Because I hate prepping, honestly. Like, the reason I'm low prep is because I hate prep. I just hate doing it. I
hate editing. That's why I don't edit anything hardly.
It burns me out. It burns me out. I hate it. I never use half the stuff. It's not fun for me. I don't do it. So that's the agreement that my players and I came to, was I'll run a game for y'all if we can find ways for me to not prep. So yeah, that's kind of the thing. So just, be aware of yourself and don't let the nerves take over. Don't let the anxieties about there being like a right way to do it. That's not true. That's dumb. There's no such thing in this medium. Anyway, I am TTBenjamin. I am the producer and showrunner of the Game Woven podcast, a indie variety podcast where we build a world one game at a time. We're still very early in the run, so catching up is easy. There's only like 12 episodes. Episodes are less than an hour. We've jumped between about 4 or 5 different games so far. We've done the Skeletons. We've done Ground Itself. We actually played a round of Quest. We did Queen of Light's Last Stand. We played My Game Adversary. And I think on Tuesday we're recording Hearts of Magic. But everything in Game Woven is set in a single world, so we're jumping between like places in the world and fleshing stuff out while also telling little stories inside of it. Very cool, very experimental game, very fun. So thank you all. This was a blasty. Pleasure meeting some of you too. Some of y'all, Sean, always nice to see you. Trooper, I'd like to be besties.
Yes, we have to.
We
have to go.
We're friends now. You can't stop it. Like that's just the truth. It's beyond me.
All right, Tiffany.
Okay, my turn. Well, something I wanted to talk about was a tool I use called Decima, which is a game that it's done by Golden Lasso Gaming. It's very hard to explain. But basically, it's a deck of tarot cards and with rules, and you use it to. I use it in my session zeros to collaboratively make the character how the PCs connect to each other, the world that they want to live in, and it's a very collaborative effort. It's really fun. If you want to see a demonstration of it, you can look on my YouTube channel on Dungeon Damsels. It's the one with the butterfly in a bottle. That's my stuff.
Which is beautiful and was created by her husband, who is an animator. So it's awesome.
His Twitter is RoboSardade. He's also in my campaign. So if you are stumped on how to even start, I would say actually just pick up Decima. It's the PDF form. You can buy it. It's like $10, I think. I don't remember. But it's totally worth the buy. Every DM that has bought it and has talked to it has come back and said, Tiffany, this changed everything. And I'm like, I know, it's great. So check that out.
You want to just link that in the chat?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Scott, do you need me to get you the link? Or
yeah, just drop it in the chat and I'll drop it in. Oh, not in chat, okay. In our chat, our Zoom chat.
Okay, I'll get it to you when I'm done talking. And yeah, I also think Ben made a really valid point about how DMing it's just making DMing fun for you, because like obviously my style of DMing is not going to work for Ben, but I like that. I like just stewing in my world and being like, oh, what if this happened, or like what if this person said this, and that's just how I find joy in DMing.
Yeah.
So whatever you need to do to make it enjoyable is really how you'll find.
There's only two things that actually matter: your player's fun and your fun.
And your fun. Yeah.
Both have to be in equal measure. You should both be having a great time.
Yeah. And you can find me as the GM for Dungeon Damsels. You can find us on YouTube in podcast form. I don't stream because I tried it and it really just didn't work for me. I thought about trying again because now we have better internet, but I'm also on Scott's campaign, Mists of Elixir. Now we're in the Box of Memories season, and so that streams on Tuesday, so you can see me tomorrow. And I'm also a cosplayer, so if you are in California and are going to be in the Bay Area and you're going to go to Fanime, you can actually meet me in person. So just message me. But I don't think anyone. I don't think I'm gonna get any hits.
Oh, you'll be surprised.
Okay, well,
People
we
wanna
can meet
meet
at
other-
Anime. I feel safe meeting you at a very public area. So, with
Are you from the Bay Area?
Yeah,
Where'd you go to high school?
Santa Teresa.
I'm also from the Bay Area. Went to George Washington High School in San Francisco, then Fremont High in Oakland, and then Castro Valley High in Castro Valley.
Oh,
So many connections all night.
yeah.
I
in the
know, I'm
green
so
room,
excited.
This has been crazy.
It's
The
So
green
good.
room.
Were any of
So
those
good.
rivals? I just need to know if there's like some drama now.
Ooh.
No, I wish there were. That'd be so exciting, right? Then you're like, oh no, our high schools would have been like, oh, there'd be a rumble.
Their high school
Damn
chorus
Spartans.
was.
But it'd be like a dance rumble though, because that's where
Yeah,
that's how we that's how we hang.
We
It'd be
can do a
like,
dance off.
All right, and Trooper SJP.
hey everyone, I'm TrooperSJP. I wanted to say, I also sometimes I've made radio broadcasts, in character radio broadcasts. One of the things I love doing is making newspapers or media that is in game, because since I do a really sandboxy thing, the player's actions impact the world, and how do you let them know it? Some of the best ways you do it is by having media say, oh, this happened. And so I love a game where I can make a radio broadcast or make a newspaper or have a whatever it is. And so to sort of go back to what Benjamin was saying, one piece of advice I would have, besides go to fantasynamegenerators.com and get a bunch of names, is GM different games. Especially if you're having a hard time prepping, GM some other games, because how I prep Good Society, which doesn't even have dice, is very different from how I'd prep The Witcher or D&D or GURPS or Fate. All of these games are very, very different. Something is wrong here. It's just cards, right? And that's a one shot only, and that's going to be a very different kind of prep. So if you're GMing a game and you're not having fun in the prep part, it might not be you. It might be the game. If you and I find that having GM'd so many different games over time, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I'm not as great. I don't enjoy this kind of prep as much, so I'm not going to GM those games that require me to do that all the time. I'm going to GM games that let me do other things, and I really like nerding out and looking at newspapers from 1920. So it is much more likely I'm going to run Call of Cthulhu or something set in 1920 because I have a great time. I just love pulling newspapers and getting adventure ideas from that. That makes me really happy, right? So I would say find the games that make you happy when it comes to prep. Because I love to improv, I like a game where the stats make sense to me. I know that 10 is average, so I can just, anytime you walk in, I'd be like, oh, their stats are 10. I'm good. Right? You know what I mean? I don't have to go and do weird, complicated. Now, some people might love doing that, and then they will make a game where you do that, right? So I would say there's probably a game that would enable you to do the prep that you enjoy most. And then I would also say, I also rank my prep in terms of must do, should do, and would be nice to do. Right, that's 22 pages. Not all of that is done for every game. There's some games the one thing I have to do is make sure the players get this one handout, and that's all I have to do. Anything else is gravy, right? So I always sort of think about what is the minimum that I have to do, and I do that first. Make sure I have to have my lines and veil sheet. I have to have that. Once I have that, right, everything else is gravy. For this game, I have to do this thing. And so for me, it's all about you don't have to do everything. Figure out what you have to do for that one particular game or that one particular session to do that. And if you have extra time, do more. If you don't, then you don't. You know what I mean? And so for me, that's always about, and you don't have to do everything all at once. You can do things when they come up. You don't have to know what's across the hill unless they get there. Or if you enjoy knowing what's across the hill, do that. Do the thing that gives you joy. And if you do that and you find the game that supports the thing that gives you joy, that will become infectious, and your players will respond to that as well, I find. So you don't have to prep in a way you don't want to, and you don't have to prep the same way for every game. Oh, and you can find me on my channel, TrooperSJP, on Fridays at 7 p.m. where I'm GMing Traveler right now. And you can also, I'm going to be producing a new game that's going to be coming out on Tuesdays at 7 Eastern, which I'm not going to say what it is yet. but I'm going to say it's called Motor City Empty Crown. And that's all I'm going to say. And you can find me. Let's see. They've not started up yet, but I'll be playing in Vampire the Masquerade over at Wandering Games channel on Mondays. And then Praxigor the Smithorius, who's also a game designer, is making a new game called Carousel Court, which is like a mashup of a couple of different systems. It's very like Dark Shadows. And I'll be playing in that. And I am a producer, GM, player, game designer, actor, singer, banjo player, and music history professor. That's me. And it has been so lovely to be here. And I've just found a whole bunch of new friends, and we all have to be in a game together because it will be epic. Whatever it is, it'll be epic. I know it.
It'll be
amazing.
agree.
Just sign it. Yeah, yeah. I'm for it.
I'm pretty sure everybody here would be super excited to play with everybody else here. It would be an amazing game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to be a band. We're going to be a audience.
We're
going to be in a band together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am Scott. You're on ZealZaddy. This is StoryTalk, our TTRPG talk show that we have most weeks. I do take 1 or 2 off a month just to kind of have some life on Sundays. And things like Mother's Day, you got to do that. We will see you next week. We have another show next week on, God, I have to look. You know what? I'm not prepped for that. So I'll post it soon. We will be posting some of the prep notes. So with YouTube, when I drop this on YouTube, probably on Thursday, and our podcast on Thursday. So be aware, you can check them out again there, and you can look at them at your own pace. Thank you for coming, and have a good night, everybody. Bye.
Good night. I'll miss you.
Oh, hang on. Let me get the link for Decoma.